10 years of marriage deserved more than the rushed reservation at Emilio's. I'd mentioned this to James 3 weeks ago, casually suggesting we book Antoine's, where we'd had our first date. But James had forgotten until this morning, scrambling to find anywhere decent with a table available on a Friday night. So here we were at Emilio's, not bad, just not special, seated at a wobbly table near the kitchen while couples around us celebrated ordinary weekends. "The osso buco is excellent here," James said, not looking up from his menu. "Or maybe the salmon special." I studied my husband over the top of my reading glasses, the ones he used to say made me look like a sexy librarian, but hadn't commented on in years. At 42, James still turned heads with his runner's build, and prematurely, silver hair. Tonight he'd worn the blue suit I'd given him for Christmas, but his tie was slightly crooked, and he hadn't bothered to polish his shoes. "It's been a decade, James," I remarked, letting the menu fall closed. "Doesn't that seem significant to you?" His eyes finally met mine, a flicker of something, guilt, annoyance, crossing his features before settling into a practiced smile. "Of course it does, Eliza. 10 amazing years." He reached across the table for my hand, his wedding band catching the candlelight. "I'm sorry about the reservation mix-up. I've just been swamped with the Parker account." The Parker account. For 6 months now, everything had been about the Parker account. Late nights, weekend meetings, constant texts and emails that James shielded from my view. Parker Financial Services had become the third party in our marriage, demanding more attention than I'd received in years. "How is that going?" I asked, trying to sound interested rather than suspicious. "Any breakthrough with the audit issues?" James launched into an explanation about tax liability and restructuring options. The financial law jargon he knew bored me. I nodded at appropriate intervals while studying the subtle changes in my husband. The new haircut that was shorter on the sides than he usually preferred. The expensive watch that had appeared on his wrist last month. A gift from the partners, he'd explained. The faint scent of unfamiliar cologne beneath his usual sandalwood. Our waiter appeared, a young man with an artist's intensity and too many tattoos for Emilio's conservative clientele. "Can I get you something to drink while you decide?" "The Barolo, 2016, James answered without consultation, "and we'll need a few more minutes." "Actually," I interjected, "I'd like the Macallan 18, neat." The surprise on James's face was worth the exorbitant price I knew Emilio's would charge. I hadn't ordered scotch in his presence since before we were married. "Since when do you drink scotch?" he asked after the waiter left. "I've always enjoyed a good scotch," I replied. "You've just forgotten." This was the problem with 10-year marriages. People stopped seeing each other and started seeing the roles they'd assigned. I was the sensible wife who drank white wine with fish, red with beef, and maybe a gin and tonic on summer holidays. Not someone who appreciated an aged single malt on a random Friday. James's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it, then quickly flipped it face down. "Partners group text," he explained without being asked. "I told them I'm offline tonight." But I'd seen the name that flashed on his screen. Natalie, with a red heart emoji next to it. The waiter returned with our drinks. I lifted the heavy crystal, tumbler savoring the smoky aroma. "To 10 years, I said, raising it in a toast. James hesitated before lifting his wine glass. "To us." As our glasses clinked, I wondered if he knew I'd already seen the text messages, that I'd hired a private investigator 3 weeks ago, that I'd met with divorce attorney Catherine Ewan yesterday, the best in the city for high-asset divorces involving infidelity. "I have something for you," James said, reaching into his suit jacket. He produced a small velvet box, the distinctive robin's egg blue of Tiffany & Co. "Happy anniversary, Eliza." Inside was a diamond tennis bracelet, elegant and impersonal. The sort of gift you give when you don't know what someone really wants, or when you're compensating for something. "It's beautiful," I said, removing it from the box. "Would you?" James fastened it around my wrist. his fingers brushing my skin in a way that once would have sent electricity through me. Now I felt nothing but the cold weight of the diamonds. "You like it?" he asked, a hint of genuine concern in his voice. "It's perfect," I assured him. "I have something for you too, but it's at home, for after dinner." His smile returned, a suggestive edge to it that I once would have found charming. Something to look forward to. We ordered ossobuco for him, scallops for me, and fell into the practiced conversation of long-married couples. Work updates, neighborhood gossip, a brief mention of his mother's upcoming surgery. Nothing about us, about the decade we'd spent, building a life that now felt like an elaborate stage set, convincing from the audience but hollow behind the scenes. The food arrived, expertly prepared but unmemorable. James was halfway through a story about his golf game with the senior partner when his phone buzzed again. This time it kept buzzing, not a text but a call. "Sorry," he said, reaching for it. "I should make sure it's not—" He stopped abruptly when he saw the screen, his expression freezing in a mask of panic. Natalie was calling, her photo filling his screen, a young woman with copper hair and a smile too familiar for comfort. "You should answer it," I said calmly, setting down my fork. "It might be important." James swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously as he declined the call. "Just a colleague. Nothing urgent." "A colleague," I repeated, with a red heart by her name. The color drained from his face. "Eliza—" His phone began buzzing again. Natalie calling back immediately. "Answer it," I insisted, louder this time. "In fact, put it on speaker. Since it's just a colleague, there's nothing to hide, right?" James stared at me, the realization dawning that this carefully orchestrated anniversary dinner had suddenly veered off script. His finger hovered over the screen, trembling slightly. "Put it on speaker, James," I repeated, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. "Or I will." Before he could respond, I reached across the table and tapped the answer button, then the speaker icon. The ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to fade as Natalie's voice filled the space between us. "James? Why aren't you answering? I've been waiting at the hotel for an hour. You promised after your anniversary dinner you'd make an excuse and come to me. I'm wearing that thing you bought me from La Perla." Her words hung in the air between us as James lunged to end the call. Too late. The damage was done, witnessed not only by me, but by our waiter, who had approached with the wine bottle for a refill and now stood frozen beside our table. "Well," I said, picking up my scotch and draining it in one burning swallow. "Happy anniversary to us." The silence that followed Natalie's voice seemed to crystallize the air around us. James sat motionless, his face a battlefield of emotions, shock, humiliation, desperation, before settling into something resembling resolution. "Eliza, I can." "Explain," he finally managed, his voice lowered to avoid the curious glances from neighboring tables. I laughed, a genuine, unexpected sound that surprised even me. "Really? You can explain why your mistress is waiting at a hotel in La Perla lingerie while you're having anniversary dinner with your wife?" I shook my head. This should be fascinating. James reached across the table, but I pulled my hands back before he could touch me. The bracelet he'd just fastened around my wrist caught the candlelight, suddenly feeling like a shackle. "It's not what you think," he began, the most cliched line in the history of caught husbands. "Stop," I said, holding up my hand. "Don't insult. My intelligence on top of everything else." His phone buzzed again, a text this time. Both our eyes flicked to the screen. "Natalie." "James? Did you butt dial me? Where are you?" The waiter who had witnessed Natalie's call returned, visibly uncomfortable. "Is everything all right with your meals?" "The food is excellent," I assured him with a brittle smile. "But I believe we'll need the check." "Of course," he nodded, clearly relieved to have an excuse to retreat. James leaned forward, his voice urgent. "Eliza, please, Let's go home and talk about this. What you heard? It's complicated. Complicated, I repeated. Is that what we're calling adultery now? A woman at the next table glanced over, poorly disguising her interest in our disintegrating evening. I couldn't blame her. This was far more entertaining than Emilio's bland tiramisu. 10 years, James, I said, lowering my voice. 10 years of building a life together. And you're spending our anniversary night juggling dinner with me and a hotel rendezvous with someone young enough to be excited about La Perla. His face flushed. It's not about her age. Oh? Do enlighten me. What exactly is it about? James ran his hand through his perfectly styled hair, disrupting it in a way that once would have made me reach over to smooth it back into place. I don't want to have this conversation here. That's convenient, I remarked, nodding thanks to the waiter who slid our check discreetly onto the table. But unfortunately for you, I don't particularly care what you want right now. James grabbed the check, avoiding my eyes as he slipped his credit card into the leather folder. I made a mistake, Eliza. A terrible mistake. But our marriage, I interrupted, appears to be a fraud. Tell me, how long has this been going on? He hesitated, and in that pause, I read the answer. Long enough that he had to calculate. 7 months, he finally admitted. 7 months. While I was planning our 10th anniversary, considering a second honeymoon, wondering if we should finally have the children conversation again, he'd been building a relationship with someone else. Is she from the office? I asked, though I already knew the answer from my private investigator's report. James nodded miserably. She's a junior associate in tax law. It started during the Parker account all-nighters. Just working late, then drinks, then... He trailed off. Then hotel rooms and lingerie, I finished for him. How original. The waiter returned with the credit card slip. James signed it without checking the total, adding a tip that was either extremely generous or the result of mathematical error caused by stress. We should go, he said, standing and extending his hand to help me up. I remained seated. I'm not going home with you, James. Panic flashed across his face. What? Where? Are you going? That's no longer your concern. I reached for my purse, a sleek clutch that matched my burgundy dress, an outfit I'd chosen carefully for this evening, an evening I'd anticipated very differently. Eliza, please, he pleaded, loud enough that several nearby diners turned to watch. Don't do this. We can work through this. I stood, smoothing my dress with deliberate calm. Can we? Tell me something, James. If her call hadn't come through during dinner, what was your plan? Finish your osso buco, take me home, wait. For me to fall asleep, then sneak out to meet her, then sneak out? His silence was confirmation enough. That's what I thought, I said, the last piece of my heart hardening. Enjoy explaining to Natalie why you're late. I'm sure the La Perla will still look lovely after she's been waiting for hours. As I turned to leave, James grabbed my wrist, the one now adorned with his anniversary diamonds. You can't just walk out. Where will you go? What about our home, our life? I extracted my arm from his grip, aware of the scene we were creating but past the point of caring. You should have considered those questions before you started sleeping. With a colleague. It was a mistake, he repeated, desperation making his voice crack. A stupid, meaningless affair. Meaningless to whom? Not to Natalie, apparently, and certainly not to me. I picked up my scotch glass, noting there was still a sip left. 7 months isn't a mistake, James. It's a choice. A series of choices, made day after day. I drained, the last of the scotch savoring the burn. By the way, I've known for weeks. The private investigator sent some fascinating photos. The Meridian Hotel seems to be your preferred meeting spot, always the corner suite. Very extravagant. The color drained from his face. You hired someone to follow me? I hired someone. To confirm what I already suspected. The unexplained late nights, the secretive phone habits, the sudden interest in your appearance. I gestured to his new haircut. You've been using my shampoo for 15 years, then suddenly switched to some salon brand. Did you think I wouldn't notice? James sank back into his chair, deflated. What happens now? Now, I said, picking up my purse. I leave. You'll be hearing from my lawyer next week. Lawyer? The word seemed to finally penetrate his shock. You're filing for divorce? Just like that? No, not just like that. After 7 months of your infidelity and 10 years of growing indifference. I unclasped the tennis bracelet, placing it on the table between us. Consider this your first alimony payment. His phone buzzed again with another text from Natalie. He ignored it, staring at the bracelet. Eliza, wait, please. I know I don't deserve another chance, but you're right, I interrupted. You don't. I walked away, feeling surprisingly steady in my 3-inch heels, aware of the restaurant's curious eyes following my departure. Outside, the cool October air felt cleansing against my flushed skin. I paused on the sidewalk, uncertain where to go next. Our brownstone on Marlborough Street suddenly felt like James's territory, filled with evidence of his deception. My phone chimed with a text notification. Catherine Ewan, my lawyer. Any updates from the anniversary dinner? Remember, documentation is key. I smiled grimly. Catherine had no idea how much documentation tonight had provided. I texted back. He got a call from his mistress during dinner. Put it on speaker. Multiple witnesses heard everything. Meeting still on for tomorrow? Her response came immediately. Perfect. Yes, 10 a.m. at my office. Bring the PI report. As I slipped my phone back into my purse, a car pulled up to the curb. A black Lincoln Town car with tinted windows. The driver's window lowered to reveal an older man with a neatly trimmed beard. Mrs. Parker? He called. I approached cautiously. Yes? I'm Thomas, Ms. Ewan's driver. She asked me to be available in case you needed transportation this evening. I hadn't expected this level of service from a lawyer, even one as highly recommended. As Catherine Ewan. Then again, I hadn't expected to need an escape vehicle from my anniversary dinner either. Thank you, Thomas, I said, allowing him to open the rear door for me. I appreciate the foresight. As the car pulled away from Emilio's, I glanced back to see James emerging onto the sidewalk, scanning the street frantically. Our eyes met briefly, through the tinted window. Him seeing nothing but his own reflection. Me watching as he grew smaller and less significant with every passing second. Catherine Ewan's office occupied the entire top floor of a sleek Seaport District building with views of Boston Harbor. The reception area featured abstract art in soothing blues and grays, comfortable seating that somehow discouraged lingering, and a discretion that whispered high-powered clients with delicate problems. Mrs. Parker, the receptionist greeted me with a practiced smile. Ms. Ewan is expecting you. Can I offer you coffee, tea, or water? Coffee, please. Black. I'd been up most of the night, alternating between rage and an unexpected sense of relief. The rage was understandable. The relief puzzled me. Of course. Please follow me. She led me down a corridor lined with doors bearing only numbers, no names. Another layer of discretion for clients who preferred their matrimonial troubles remain private. At the end of the hallway, double doors opened into a corner office that made the most of its harbor views. Catherine Ewan stood to greet me, extending her hand with a firm grasp that matched her reputation. At 50-something, she projected confidence. Without arrogance, sleek gray bob, impeccably tailored navy suit, minimal jewelry except for a striking jade pendant. Eliza, thank you for coming. She gestured to the seating area by the windows rather than the imposing desk. I'm sorry about the circumstances, but based on your text last night, it seems we have significant developments to discuss. I settled into a leather chair, placing my purse and the manila envelope containing the PI report on the coffee table between us. You could say that. My anniversary dinner provided more evidence than I anticipated. A young man in a charcoal suit entered with my coffee and a tea service for Catherine. "Adrienne will join us shortly," she explained as he arranged everything and departed silently. "She's our forensic accountant and will be essential for the financial discovery process." I nodded, grateful for Catherine's efficiency. During our initial consultation, she'd outlined a comprehensive approach to high-asset divorces involving infidelity, legal, financial, and strategic components working in concert. "Tell me about last night," she prompted, adding a thin slice of lemon to her tea. "You mentioned a call from the mistress?" I recounted the dinner scene, James's distraction, the bracelet, the call from Natalie, and the subsequent confession. Catherine listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a leather-bound pad. 7 months, she repeated when I finished. "And you have the private investigator's documentation of their meetings?" I slid the manila envelope across the table. 6 weeks of surveillance, hotel visits, dinner dates, weekend excursions to Vermont. Apparently they went antiquing. The banality of it still stung. James hated antiquing with me. Catherine reviewed the photos and detailed report, her expression professionally neutral. "This is excellent documentation. The hotel receipts are particularly useful. Looks like he's been charging these rendezvous to his corporate card." "Tax deduction for adultery?" I asked dryly. A smile flickered across her face. "More likely carelessness or arrogance. Either works in our favor." She set the report aside as the door opened to admit a woman in her 40s with auburn hair and sharp eyes behind stylish glasses. "Adrienne Porter, our forensic specialist," Catherine introduced. "Adrienne, this is Eliza Parker." "The anniversary dinner case," Adrienne nodded, joining us with an iPad in hand. "I've reviewed your preliminary financial disclosures, Mrs. Parker. Your husband's position at Hargrove, Miller & Walsh presents some interesting possibilities." "Please call me Eliza," I requested, already feeling overwhelmed by the clinical dissection of my marriage's corpse. "And what possibilities are those?" Adrienne tapped her iPad screen. "As a senior partner in their tax practice, your husband has significant compensation beyond his base salary, performance bonuses, profit sharing, equity partnership distributions. Many of these can be strategically timed or deferred." "Meaning he could be hiding assets?" I asked. "Not hiding, necessarily," Catherine interjected, "but potentially structuring his compensation to minimize what appears as income during divorce proceedings. Did he mention any changes to his partnership agreement or compensation structure recently?" I thought back over the past months. He mentioned a restructuring of the profit-sharing system about 4 months ago. Said it would mean less immediate income, but better long-term stability. Catherine and Adrienne exchanged meaningful glances. That timing aligns with when he likely realized the affair had become serious, Catherine noted. "Adrienne, we'll need to subpoena the partnership agreements, both current and previous versions." "Already on my list," Adrienne confirmed, along with personal and business credit card statements, banking records, investment accounts, and tax returns for the past 5 years. The methodical dismantling of financial privacy should have bothered me, but after last night, I felt nothing but cold determination. "James has always handled our major financial decisions. I focused on the household management, charitable commitments, our social calendar." "A common arrangement," Catherine acknowledged, "and one that often leaves the non-financial spouse vulnerable. But that changes today. From this point forward, you'll have complete visibility into your marital assets." Adrienne leaned forward. "Do you have access to any joint accounts? Online banking credentials?" "Yes, for our household accounts, but James maintains separate accounts for his partnership distributions and investments." "Perfect starting point," Adrienne nodded. "We'll need those credentials, and I suggest you transfer your portion of any joint funds to a new account immediately. Not everything. That could be construed as financial misconduct, but enough to sustain you during proceedings." Catherine set down her teacup. Now let's discuss strategy. Massachusetts is an equitable distribution state, not community property. Courts divide marital assets equitably rather than automatically 50-50. What does that mean practically? I asked. It means we have room to negotiate based on circumstances, including his infidelity, Catherine explained. While adultery isn't specifically factored into asset division by statute, it can influence judges' perception of what's equitable, especially when combined with financial misconduct. And the Parker account? I asked. The client he claimed required all those late nights? Catherine's smile was razor-sharp. Yes. The convenient cover for his affair. We'll need to determine if there was actual financial benefit from that client relationship, or if it was primarily a fiction to facilitate his extramarital activities. Adrian made a note. I'll add Parker Financial Services records to our discovery requests. What about the house? I asked, thinking of our Marlborough Street brownstone, purchased 7 years ago and meticulously renovated. I'm staying with a friend temporarily, but I want to go home eventually. The marital residence is typically a significant negotiation point, Catherine acknowledged. Who owns the property? Is it jointly titled? Yes, we purchased it together. Both names on the deed, both on the mortgage. And do you want to keep it post-divorce? The question gave me pause. The brownstone represented years of careful restoration, weekend trips to architectural salvage yards, arguments with contractors. But it also contained memories now tainted by James's betrayal. I'm not sure, I admitted. It's worth considerably more than we paid, given the renovations and market appreciation. Then we have options, Catherine assured me. You could keep it with appropriate equalization payments, sell it and divide proceeds, or use it as a negotiating chip for other assets you value more. A knock at the door preceded the entrance of a young associate, who whispered something to Catherine before departing. Interesting development, Catherine announced once we were alone again. Your husband has retained counsel, Martin Hewitt at Caldwell and Reed. Is that significant? I asked. Very. Hewitt specializes in protecting high-net-worth individuals. In divorce, aggressive, thorough, occasionally ruthless. His involvement suggests your husband is preparing for a fight. My stomach tightened. Even with the evidence of his affair, the evidence of infidelity is powerful leverage, but not determinative, Catherine explained. Hewitt will likely advise him to acknowledge the affair, but contest its relevance to financial settlements. And will that work? Catherine's expression hardened. Not with me as opposing counsel. Now, we need to discuss your ideal outcome. What do you want from this divorce, Eliza? Beyond fair asset division. The question caught me off guard. Throughout the past weeks of suspicion and investigation, I'd focused entirely on confirming James's betrayal. I hadn't allowed myself to think beyond that. I began, then faltered. What did I want? Financial security, yes. The dignity of not being discarded for a younger woman, certainly. But beyond that, I want to emerge from this with my self-respect intact. I want acknowledgement of what he's done, not just the affair, but the months of lies. And I want to ensure my future is secure. Catherine nodded approvingly. Those are excellent starting points. Adrian and I will translate those objectives into specific negotiation positions. She leaned forward. But there's something else we need to discuss. Something that may significantly impact our strategy. What's that? The Mistress, Catherine said simply. Natalie. Her call last night was fortuitous evidence, but her ongoing involvement presents both risks and opportunities. I don't understand. If James intends to continue this relationship post-divorce, it changes the dynamic. He may be more willing to settle generously to expedite the process. However, if she has expectations of marriage herself, she might encourage him to fight more aggressively to preserve assets for their future. I finished, understanding the implication. Precisely. Do you have any insight into the nature of their relationship? Is this a casual affair or something he considers serious? I thought about the red heart emoji beside Natalie's name, the La Perla lingerie, the weekend trips. I'm not sure. He called it a meaningless affair last night, but his actions suggest otherwise. Catherine made another note. We'll need to assess that dimension carefully. Now, there's one more critical question. Are you prepared for this to become messy? Messy how? High-profile divorces involving successful professionals often spill into social and professional spheres. Your husband may attempt to control the narrative, perhaps even shift blame. The thought of James recasting our marriage's end to mutual friends and colleagues sent anger coursing through me. I won't be painted as the villain in his story. Good, Catherine said with satisfaction. Because I propose we take control of the narrative immediately, starting with scheduling a deposition for Ms. Natalie. What's her last name? Reynolds, I supplied, recalling it from the PI report. Natalie Reynolds. Excellent. We'll schedule Ms. Reynolds for deposition at the earliest opportunity. Her testimony under oath regarding the timeline and nature of their relationship will be invaluable, and the prospect alone may motivate your husband to reconsider a protracted legal battle. As the meeting continued, I felt a strange sense of empowerment replacing the humiliation of the previous night. James had shattered our marriage with his choices, but the shape of its ending would be determined by mine. Caroline's guest bedroom had been my sanctuary for 3 days, a neutral space where I could process the implosion of my marriage without constantly confronting physical reminders of James. But now, armed with Catherine Ewan's strategic advice and a temporary court order granting me exclusive use of the marital home, it was time to reclaim my territory. You sure you're ready for this? Caroline asked, leaning against her kitchen counter as I packed my overnight bag. As my oldest friend and successful real estate agent, she understood both the emotional and practical implications of returning to the brownstone. No, I admitted, folding the borrowed silk pajamas she'd lent me. But Catherine thinks it's important to establish occupancy immediately, and hiding in your guest room isn't exactly moving forward. Caroline nodded, handing me a travel mug of coffee. Just remember what we discussed. Don't engage with James if he shows up. Document everything. And call me if you need backup. I can be there in 15 minutes with wine and reinforcements. The reinforcements being her husband Mike, whose imposing physical presence had proven useful during other friends' divorce dramas. I smiled gratefully, wondering when I'd stopped being the friend offering support and became the one needing it. Thomas, Catherine's driver, who was rapidly becoming a fixture in my new reality, waited patiently outside Caroline's Back Bay apartment. The drive to Marlborough Street took barely 10 minutes, but the psychological distance felt immeasurable. Would you like me to accompany you inside, Mrs. Parker? Thomas asked as we pulled up to the brownstone. Ms. Ewan suggested I ensure the premises are secure. I glanced at my home, noting with relief that James's Audi was absent from its usual parking spot. That's very thoughtful, Thomas. Yes, please. The key turned in the lock with familiar ease, but crossing the threshold felt like entering a stage set, recognizable, yet somehow artificial. Everything appeared exactly as I'd left it 3 nights ago, down to the mail I'd sorted on the entry table and the half-empty bottle of Pellegrino in the refrigerator door. I'll check the upper floors, Thomas offered, his formal demeanor softening, slightly with obvious concern for my well-being. While he conducted his inspection, I stood in the center of our meticulously designed living room, seeing it with new eyes. The Moroccan rug we'd haggled over in Marrakesh during our 5th anniversary trip, the antique secretary desk where I wrote thank you notes and managed our social calendar, the built-in bookshelves James had insisted on having custom-made to display his leather-bound first editions, books he rarely read but enjoyed owning. Every object told a story of our shared life, but now I questioned which stories were authentic and which were carefully curated fiction. All clear, Mrs. Parker, Thomas reported, returning downstairs. No sign of recent occupancy upstairs. Would you like me to stay until you're settled? That won't be necessary, I assured him. But thank you, Thomas, for everything. After he departed, I conducted my own inspection of the house. In the master bedroom, I noticed subtle signs of James's absence. His charging cables missing from the nightstand, travel toiletries gone from his side of the bathroom cabinet. He'd clearly retrieved essentials sometime while I was at Caroline's, but hadn't disturbed anything else. The walk-in closet revealed more significant changes. About a third of his suits were missing, along with several pairs of shoes and his weekend casual wear. The sight of the vacant shelves and hanging spaces brought an unexpected wave of emotion. Not sadness exactly, but a disorienting sense of alteration. This room, like our marriage, appeared intact at first glance, but revealed critical absences upon closer inspection. I was debating whether to sleep in the master bedroom or one of the guest rooms when the doorbell rang. My pulse quickened as I descended the stairs. Through the frosted glass panels flanking the front door, I could make out a male silhouette, too tall to be James. A uniformed courier stood on the doorstep, electronic tablet in hand. Eliza Parker? Yes, I confirmed warily. Delivery requiring signature. He presented the tablet while retrieving a thick envelope from his satchel. I signed and accepted the envelope, noting the return address of Caldwell and Reed, James's attorneys. Inside were legal documents with a cover letter from Martin Hewitt, the aggressive divorce attorney Catherine had mentioned. Dear Mrs. Parker, this office represents James Parker in the matter of your impending divorce. Enclosed, please find our proposed settlement agreement outlining equitable distribution of marital assets and proposed spousal support calculations. Mr. Parker wishes to resolve this matter expeditiously and with minimal public discord. The enclosed terms are generous and reflect his desire to achieve an amicable resolution despite recent tensions. We request your response within 10 business days. Sincerely, Martin Hewitt, Eskenaken, Caldwell, and Reed. The clinical language and presumptuous tone sent anger coursing through me. Recent tensions. As if catching my husband planning to abandon our anniversary dinner for a hotel rendezvous with his mistress was a minor disagreement over dinner choices. I scanned the proposed settlement. A 50-50 split of our investment accounts, James. Retaining his partnership equity and retirement accounts. Me keeping the brownstone provided I refinanced to remove his name from the mortgage. The spousal support calculation seemed deliberately complex, with clauses about duration and termination upon remarriage or cohabitation. Flipping to the final pages, I found what Catherine had warned might be included, a confidentiality clause, prohibiting either party from discussing the circumstances of our separation with anyone outside immediate family. James was attempting to legally muzzle me, to prevent Natalie Reynolds's name from ever being attached to the destruction of our marriage. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Received our copy of Hewitt's proposal. Don't respond. Bringing in Michael Chen to review the partnership valuation issues. Meet tomorrow? I replied in the affirmative, relieved to have guidance through this calculated first move in what was clearly becoming a chess match rather than a simple division of assets. The sound of a key in the front door lock froze me in place. Legal documents still spread across the kitchen island. I hadn't anticipated James attempting to enter. The temporary court order explicitly granted me exclusive use of the property. Eliza? James's voice called from the entryway. Your car is outside. I know you're home. I gathered the documents, quickly shoving them back into the envelope. You're not supposed to be here, James. There's a court order. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking simultaneously familiar and foreign. He'd lost weight in the 3 days since our anniversary dinner, his face slightly gaunt beneath a growth of stubble he'd normally never allow. I still live here, he said, his tone a mixture of defiance and uncertainty. My name is on the deed. And mortgage. Not according to Judge Hoffman's temporary order, I countered, pulling out my phone. Which I'm happy to provide to the police if you force me to call them. James raised his hands in a placating gesture. That won't be necessary. I just need to collect some things. Professional materials primarily. Your clothes and toiletries are already gone, I observed. What else could you possibly need right now that couldn't wait for proper legal arrangements? My files from the home office. Client information that's confidential and necessary for ongoing casework. He took a step toward the staircase. I'll be quick, Eliza. You won't even know I'm here. Stop. My voice was sharper than intended. You don't get to dictate terms here, James. Not anymore. He sighed, running a hand through his disheveled silver hair, the hair that had first attracted me at a charity gala 12 years ago. Back. Then, I'd found the premature silver distinguished on a 30-year-old attorney with ambitious eyes and a confident smile. Now it just made him look older, tired, defeated. What do you want from me? He asked quietly. Right now? I want you to leave my house. Your house, he repeated. After one dinner gone wrong, 10 years of marriage means nothing? The audacity of his self-pity ignited something fierce within. Me. One dinner gone wrong? Is that your characterization of what happened? You were planning to leave our anniversary celebration to meet your mistress at a hotel. The mistress you've been seeing for 7 months. The mistress who interrupted. Our anniversary dinner with a call about the lingerie you purchased for her. James winced at each repetition of mistress, his gaze dropping to the envelope on the counter. I see you've received Martin's proposal. Yes, your generous offer to buy my silence about your affair in exchange for letting me keep the house. I helped pay for and renovate. I crossed my arms. How magnanimous of you. It's a fair settlement, he insisted. More than fair, given Massachusetts law doesn't consider fault in property division. Is that what Martin told you? That your adultery is irrelevant? I smiled without warmth. Catherine Ewan has a different perspective. The mention of my attorney's name caused a visible reaction, a tightening around his eyes that confirmed. Catherine's reputation preceded her. Catherine Ewan represents angry wives looking for revenge, not equitable settlements. No, Catherine represents clients whose spouses attempt to minimize marital assets during divorce proceedings, I corrected. Clients whose husbands suddenly restructure their partnership compensation 4 months after beginning affairs with junior associates. James paled slightly. My compensation restructuring was a firm-wide initiative. We'll see what discovery reveals, I replied calmly. Now, about those work files you need. If you provide a detailed list to Catherine's office, we can arrange supervised retrieval at a mutually convenient time. Supervised retrieval? I'm not a criminal, Eliza. No, just an adulterer with a documented history of deception. I moved toward the front door, opening it in clear dismissal. Please leave now, James, or I really will call the police regarding the violation of the court order. He hesitated, clearly weighing the professional embarrassment of a police report against the inconvenience of working without his files. This isn't you, Eliza. This cold, calculating person. This isn't who you are. You're right, I acknowledged. This isn't who I was. But discovering your husband's betrayal has a way of changing a person. Consider it another consequence of your choices. After James reluctantly departed, I secured the deadbolt and activated the alarm system with a new code Catherine had advised me to set. Standing in the foyer of what was now definitively my house, I felt neither victory nor sorrow, just the steadying clarity that comes with reclaiming what's rightfully yours. The home office had always been James's domain, a wood-paneled sanctuary of leather and mahogany where he took important calls and occasionally worked weekends. In 10 years of marriage, I'd rarely spent time there beyond delivering coffee or retrieving him for dinner. Now, under Adrienne Porter's careful guidance, I was methodically dismantling its secrets. File cabinets first, Adrienne directed, setting up her laptop on the desk. The forensic accountant had arrived at 9 sharp, armed with a court order authorizing us to search for and copy financial records relevant to the divorce proceedings. Focus on anything tax-related, investment statements, partnership documents. I pulled open the first drawer, surprised to find it meticulously organized, color-coded folders arranged by year and category. James was always obsessive about his filing system, I noted, removing the most recent section labeled HMW Partnership. Adrian accepted the files with latex-gloved hands. Organizational skills and ethical behavior aren't always correlated, unfortunately. Some of the most sophisticated financial fraud cases I've worked involved immaculate record-keeping. As she photographed and scanned documents, I continued through the remaining drawers. Most contained exactly what one would expect: tax returns, investment statements, insurance policies, property records for the brownstone and our small vacation cottage on Cape Cod. Anything unusual? Adrian asked without looking up from her work. Not really, I admitted, disappointed despite myself. Part of me had expected to uncover dramatic evidence of financial deception, secret accounts, or suspicious transactions. That would explain James's betrayal in tangible terms. Instead, I found only the mundane documentation of our shared financial life. Check the desk drawers, Adrian suggested. People often separate what they consider official records from more private financial matters. The large center drawer contained standard office supplies, pens, notepads, paper clips, along with a collection of business cards and a half-empty roll of antacids. The right drawer held technology accessories, charging cables, flash drives, an external hard drive, and several outdated smartphones. The locked left drawer, however, presented a challenge. "Do you have a key?" Adrian asked, noticing my struggle with the small brass lock. "No." James always kept it with his key ring. I frowned, recalling how he'd reflexively close and lock the drawer whenever I entered the office. Adrian reached into her bag and produced a small case containing various tools. "Legal lockpicking is one of my more useful skills," she explained with a slight smile. "Spouses frequently secure sensitive documents in obvious locations with minimal security." Within minutes, the drawer opened with a satisfying click. Inside lay several unmarked manila folders, a small leather-bound notebook, and a stack of credit card statements from an account I didn't recognize. "Citibank Sapphire Reserve," I read from the top statement. "I didn't know we had this card." "You don't," Adrian confirmed, examining the statements. "This is a personal account in James's name only. Opened approximately 8 months ago." 8 months ago, just before his affair with Natalie began. I spread the statements across the desk, noting charges that told a damning story. Recurring: hotel bookings at the Meridian, dinner for 2 at restaurants I'd never visited, jewelry purchases from Tiffany and local boutiques, weekend charges in Vermont and the Berkshires. "The timeline matches perfectly," I observed, anger churning fresh in my stomach. "He opened a separate credit account specifically to finance his affair." Adrian photographed each statement methodically. "This is extremely helpful. Hidden accounts, opened during marriage, are particularly problematic in divorce proceedings. Suggests deliberate financial concealment." The leather notebook proved even more revealing. Inside, James had maintained meticulous records of cash withdrawals and expenditures, alongside notes about N with dates and locations. Most entries included amounts: $400 for N birthday gift, $280 for dinner at Sorelina, $175 for spa certificate. He tracked every penny he spent on her, I marveled. The systematic documentation somehow more hurtful than the affair itself. This wasn't reckless passion. It was calculated indulgence. Adrian reviewed the notebook with professional detachment. "This level of detail is unusual, but helpful for our purposes. It establishes pattern and intent." As she continued scanning documents, I turned my attention to the remaining manila folders. The first contained property information for an apartment, Building in Cambridge, a 6-unit Victorian conversion near Harvard Square that I'd never heard James mention. Did you know about this investment property? I asked, showing Adrienne the deed and management company statements. She examined them with increasing interest. This appears to be held in an LLC, Parker Holdings, with James as the sole member. Purchase date was 4 years ago. She flipped through the management reports. Fully rented, generating approximately $12,000 monthly in gross rental income. That's impossible, I protested. I would have known about a real estate investment of that size. We would have discussed it. Not necessarily, Adrienne countered, her expression sympathetic but firm. I see this frequently, assets deliberately kept separate from marital finances. The question becomes whether it was purchased with marital funds or truly separate property. The second folder contained ownership documents for a small aircraft, a single-engine Cirrus SR-22, registered to the same Parker Holdings LLC. Maintenance. Records showed regular service at Hanscom Field, a general aviation airport outside Boston. James doesn't even fly, I said, bewildered by these discoveries. At least he never mentioned an interest in aviation. Adrienne added these documents to her growing collection of scans. The aircraft was purchased 3 years ago. Maintenance logs show regular use, approximately twice monthly. The final folder revealed the most personal betrayal yet, a lease agreement for a luxury apartment in Back Bay, dated 6 months ago with a 12-month term. The tenant name, Natalie Reynolds. He's been paying for her apartment, I whispered, the paper trembling in my hands. $6,000 a month. Adrienne took the document gently. This is significant. Establishes financial support beyond casual gifts or entertainment. Particularly problematic given the timing coincides with his partnership compensation restructuring. The systematic uncovering of James's secret financial life left me reeling. Beyond the affair itself, the existence of hidden assets and expenditures revealed a level of deception I hadn't thought him capable of. The James I believed I'd married, ethical, transparent, fundamentally decent despite his workaholic tendencies, seemed increasingly fictional. Let's check his computer, Adrienne suggested, moving to the desktop Mac that dominated one corner of the desk. Financial records often leave digital footprints beyond paper documentation. The computer was password protected, but Catherine had anticipated this obstacle. The court order specifically authorized forensic access to electronic records related to financial matters, and Adrienne came prepared with specialized software that bypassed login requirements. I'm creating a mirror image of the hard drive, she explained as lines of code scrolled across the screen. This preserves the original data while allowing us to search for relevant files. While the software worked, I continued exploring the office, examining bookshelves and checking behind framed certificates for wall safes or hidden compartments. Behind a Harvard Law diploma, I discovered a small wall safe with a digital keypad. Adrienne, I called. There's a safe here. She joined, me examining the model. Standard residential security safe, likely contains valuables or sensitive documents. Any idea about the combination? I considered possible codes James might use. Try 061273, his birth date. The safe remained locked. What about your anniversary? Adrienne suggested. 12213, I supplied, the date now painfully ironic given recent events. The safe beeped in rejection. After several more failed attempts with significant dates, Adrienne consulted her notes. Let's try the apartment lease date for Natalie Reynolds. When did it begin exactly? January 15th this year, I read from the document. 01522. The safe emitted a different tone, followed by a mechanical click as the door swung open. Inside lay a small jewelry box, a USB drive, a passport I didn't recognize, and several bound documents. I removed them carefully, feeling like an archaeologist, unearthing artifacts from a civilization I thought I understood but clearly didn't. The jewelry box contained a diamond engagement ring, modern design, emerald cut, at least 2 carats. The attached receipt from Shreve, Crump & Lowe was dated 1 week before our anniversary. He was planning to propose to her, I realized, the evidence undeniable. While still married to me. Adrienne documented the ring with clinical efficiency. The timing corroborates intent to continue the relationship beyond casual affair status. The passport proved equally revealing, a second U.S. passport in James's name, issued 6 months prior. I flipped through it, finding entry stamps for Turks and Caicos, Mexico and Canada, trips he'd never mentioned, taken during periods he'd claimed to be at conferences or on business travel. He's been living a double life, I said, the scale of deception finally becoming clear. Completely separate from our marriage. The bound documents included offshore account statements from the Cayman Islands and Singapore, showing balances totaling nearly $2 million. Account opening dates ranged from 2 to 4 years prior, all during our marriage, all without my knowledge. This is exactly what we needed, Adrienne said, her professional demeanor slipping to reveal genuine surprise at the extent of concealment. These offshore accounts will be pivotal in settlement negotiations. The USB drive contained the final piece of the puzzle, a folder of photographs documenting James and Natalie on various trips, at restaurants, on a small plane I now recognized as the Cirrus from the ownership documents. In every image, they appeared relaxed, intimate, unquestionably involved in a serious relationship. The most recent photos, dated just 2 weeks before our anniversary, showed them touring what appeared to be a luxury home under construction. Expansive, windows overlooking ocean views, modern architecture unlike our traditional brownstone. I'll need to contact Catherine immediately, Adrienne said, carefully bagging the USB drive as evidence. These discoveries significantly change our approach to asset division and spousal support calculations. As she stepped into the hallway to make the call, I remained in the office, surrounded by physical evidence of my husband's systematic betrayal. The meticulously documented double life revealed not just infidelity, but a fundamental question. Had I ever truly known James Parker at all? The computer software completed its scan, revealing thousands of emails, documents, and financial records. Among the recently accessed files was one labeled futureplans.pdf, a detailed timeline James had created outlining his exit strategy from our marriage. August, finalize offshore transfers. September, confirm Natalie's bar exam results. October, anniversary dinner with Eliza. Then, business emergency. November, request divorce citing growing apart. December, initial settlement offer, generous to expedite process. January, Natalie moves to Beacon Hill property. February, engagement announcement, after divorce filing. March, begin construction on Nantucket House. June, wedding in Turks and Caicos. Each step meticulously planned, each detail accounted for, including using our anniversary dinner as cover for meeting Natalie later that evening. The cold calculation evident in this timeline struck deeper than any emotional betrayal could. This wasn't a man who had fallen into temptation or made a series of bad decisions. This was strategic decimation of our marriage while constructing its replacement. Adrienne returned, her expression grave but determined. Catherine's filing emergency motions this afternoon for asset freezing and additional discovery. The offshore accounts alone justify aggressive legal intervention. I nodded, handing her the printed timeline I'd discovered. James didn't just have an affair, he was engineering a complete life transition, replacing me with Natalie, our brownstone, with properties I never knew existed, our shared history with a carefully constructed future. This level of premeditation will be compelling in court, Adrienne assured me, adding the timeline to her evidence collection. Judges respond strongly to documented intention to deceive a spouse. As we completed our investigation of the office, cataloging and copying everything of financial significance, I felt an unexpected clarity emerging from the chaos of discovery. The question wasn't whether my marriage could be saved. It was whether it had ever truly existed beyond the elaborate fiction James had constructed. The conference room at Catherine Ewan's office had been transformed into a battlefield of legal formality, court reporters stationed in the corner, video camera positioned for optimal coverage, water carafes and legal pads precisely arranged. At each seat, Catherine sat beside me, reviewing notes while we waited, her calm demeanor anchoring me against the storm of anxiety churning inside. "Remember," she murmured without looking up, "you're here as an observer only. No matter what," she says, "no matter how provocative, maintain your composure. Your reactions will be recorded along with her testimony." I nodded, adjusting the cuffs of my navy silk blouse. I'd dressed with careful consideration for this moment, professional, dignified, nothing that could be interpreted as either victim or aggressor. The simple gold band still on my left hand was my only visible connection to the marriage now under forensic examination. The door opened to admit Martin Hewitt, James's attorney, accompanied by a tall, rail-thin associate whose severe expression matched her tightly pulled-back hair. They arranged their materials with military precision, neither acknowledging our presence beyond perfunctory nods. "Any word on the witness?" Catherine asked, breaking the frigid silence. Hewitt checked his watch, a Patek Philippe that matched, the one James had purchased last year. "Ms. Reynolds and her counsel should arrive momentarily. I understand there was some discussion about postponement, which Judge Hoffman denied yesterday," Catherine reminded him, her tone pleasantly lethal. "As you're well aware." Before Hewitt could respond, the door opened again. James entered first, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit I'd never seen, new. "Purchase," I noted, cataloging yet another small betrayal. His gaze found mine briefly before skittering away, discomfort evident in the tightness of his shoulders. Behind him came Natalie Reynolds, accompanied by a woman I assumed was her attorney. Seeing her in person, rather than through the lens of private investigator photos, was jarring. She was younger than I'd imagined, early 30s at most, with the copper hair I'd glimpsed on James's phone screen now styled in elegant waves. Her cream-colored dress and camel blazer projected professional competence, contradicting the trophy mistress image I'd constructed in my mind. Our eyes met across the conference table, her expression revealing a complex mixture of defiance and discomfort. I maintained neutral eye contact until she looked away first, settling into a chair as far from me as the room allowed. Catherine initiated the proceedings with practiced efficiency, introducing all parties for the record while the court reporter captured every word. The atmosphere crackled with tension as the attorneys completed preliminary formalities. "Please state your name for the record," Catherine began once Natalie had been sworn in. "Natalie Ann Reynolds." Her voice was steady but tight, hands clasped. Before her on the polished table. "And your occupation?" "I'm an attorney with Hargrove, Miller & Walsh, Tax Practice Group." "How long have you been employed there?" 2 years in September." Catherine nodded, consulting her notes with deliberate casualness. "And what is your relationship with James Parker?" Natalie glanced at her attorney, who nodded slightly. "We are in a romantic relationship." When did this romantic relationship begin? Another glance toward her counsel. "Approximately 7 months ago. March of this year?" "Yes." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "Were you aware at that time that Mr. Parker was married?" Natalie hesitated, clearly weighing her response carefully. "Yes, I was aware he was married." "Were you aware that his wife, my client, believed they were in a monogamous marriage?" "Objection," Hewitt interrupted. "Calls for speculation about what Mrs. Parker believed." Catherine smiled thinly. "I'll rephrase. Ms. Reynolds, did Mr. Parker ever indicate to you that he and his wife had an open marriage or separate arrangement that permitted his relationship with you?" "No," Natalie admitted, color rising in her cheeks. "He said their marriage was essentially over, but they hadn't formalized it." Did he specify when this marriage had supposedly ended? He said they had grown apart over several years, that they were living separate lives under the same roof. I see. Catherine consulted a document before her. Were you aware that Mr. and Mrs. Parker took a trip to London together in February of this year, just 1 month before your relationship began? Natalie's composure faltered slightly. No, I wasn't aware of that specific trip. Were you aware they attended the Hargrove Miller and Walsh holiday party together in December, where Mrs. Parker was introduced to your colleagues as Mr. Parker's wife? I was at that party, yes. So you had met Mrs. Parker prior to beginning your relationship with her husband? Natalie shifted uncomfortably. We weren't introduced directly, but I knew who she was. Throughout this exchange, I maintained the neutral expression Catherine had advised, though internally I was cataloging each revelation. Natalie had knowingly entered a relationship with a married partner at her firm, had met me at firm functions, had accepted James's characterization of our marriage without question. Catherine turned to a new page in her notes. Ms. Reynolds, are you currently residing at 375 Beacon Street, apartment 4C? Surprise flickered across Natalie's face. Yes, that's my current address. And when did you begin residing at that location? January of this year. Who pays the rent for this apartment? Natalie hesitated, glancing at James, whose expression had hardened into careful blankness. I do. The full amount of $6,000 monthly? I share expenses with... She stopped abruptly. Please complete your answer, Ms. Reynolds, Catherine prompted. Natalie's attorney leaned over, whispering something in her ear. After a moment, Natalie continued. James helps with the rent. Helps, Catherine repeated. Could you be more specific? About the nature of this help? He pays the rent, Natalie conceded. But I cover utilities and other expenses. So Mr. Parker pays $6,000 monthly for your apartment. Is that arrangement documented anywhere? A written agreement, perhaps? No, it's an informal arrangement. Catherine produced a document from her folder. I'm entering as Exhibit C the lease. Agreement for 375 Beacon Street, apartment 4C. Please note the lessee is listed as Parker Holdings LLC, not Ms. Reynolds personally. Martin Hewitt leaned forward. The lease arrangement is irrelevant to these proceedings. On the contrary, Catherine countered smoothly, expenditures from marital funds for the benefit of a paramour are directly relevant to dissipation of assets, a key consideration in equitable distribution. Turning back to Natalie, Catherine continued her methodical questioning. Ms. Reynolds, are you familiar with the Cirrus SR-22 aircraft registered to Parker Holdings LLC? The question clearly caught Natalie off guard. Yes, I've flown in James's plane. How many times would you estimate? I don't know exactly. Maybe 15 or 20 times. And the destinations of these flights? Various places. Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, the Adirondacks, once to Toronto. Catherine nodded, making a note. During the period you've been involved with Mr. Parker, has he given you any gifts valued over $500? Natalie's attorney interjected. My client is not obligated to provide an accounting of personal gifts. Your client is under oath in a deposition related to dissipation of marital assets, Catherine countered. The question is entirely relevant and appropriate. After a whispered conference with her attorney, Natalie answered reluctantly. Yes, James has given me several gifts. Could you enumerate them for the record? Another hesitation. A diamond? Bracelet for my birthday? A Hermes handbag? Some designer clothing items? A weekend spa package at Canyon Ranch? And lingerie from La Perla? La Perla? Natalie's gaze snapped to mine, then quickly away. Yes. Catherine's expression betrayed nothing as she continued. Ms. Reynolds, are you aware of any real estate purchases or construction projects Mr. Parker has initiated in the past year? The question elicited an immediate reaction from both James and Martin Hewitt, who conferred in urgent whispers. Natalie glanced at them before responding. I'm not comfortable answering questions about James's financial matters. Your comfort is not at issue, Catherine noted calmly. You've been shown photographs of yourself with Mr. Parker touring a construction site on Nantucket. Were you aware this property was purchased through Parker Holdings LLC for $3.2 million in April of this year? Natalie's attorney raised her hand. My client needs a moment to confer. As they whispered intensely, I watched James's expression darken from concern to anger. Whatever defensive strategy they'd planned was clearly unraveling in the face of Catherine's meticulous preparation. After their consultation, Natalie responded with careful precision. I was aware James was building a home on Nantucket. I wasn't privy to the financial details of that transaction. Were you aware of his intention regarding this property? Catherine pressed. Objection, Martin Hewitt interjected. Calls for speculation about Mr. Parker's intentions, Catherine rephrased. Did Mr. Parker discuss with you any plans for this property that included you? Natalie's gaze flickered toward James again, seeking guidance he couldn't ethically provide during testimony. He mentioned it would be a place where we could spend time together. Did he indicate this would be a vacation home or a primary residence? He said. Natalie paused, visibly uncomfortable. He said it would be our home. Our home, Catherine repeated. Did Mr. Parker discuss a timeline for when this transition might occur? He mentioned being able to move in by next summer, after the divorce was finalized. Catherine smiled slightly. After the divorce was finalized. So Mr. Parker had discussed divorce plans with you prior to my client discovering your relationship on October 22nd of this year. Yes, Natalie admitted. He said he planned to request a divorce after their anniversary. The calculated cruelty of this revelation struck me with physical force. James had intended to use our anniversary dinner, a celebration of 10 years, together, as his last obligation before discarding our marriage. The dinner I'd hoped might reconnect us had never been anything but a checkbox on his exit strategy. Catherine turned to a new page in her notes. Ms. Reynolds, are you familiar with an account at First Caribbean International Bank in Grand Cayman? This question provoked an immediate objection from Martin Hewitt, who stood abruptly. This line of questioning exceeds the scope of permissible discovery. Offshore banking matters were not included in the deposition notice. On the contrary, Catherine responded, producing another document. Item 7 specifically references all financial accounts known to the witness. If Ms. Reynolds has knowledge of Caribbean banking relationships, they fall squarely within scope. Judge Hoffman's clerk, present to rule on procedural disputes, consulted the deposition notice before nodding. The question is permitted. The witness should answer if she has knowledge. Natalie glanced nervously between James and her attorney before responding. I'm aware James has international banking relationships, yes. Have you traveled with Mr. Parker to the Cayman Islands? Once, in June. And the purpose of this trip? Another hesitation. It was presented to me as a vacation. Presented to you, Catherine repeated thoughtfully. During this vacation, did Mr. Parker meet with banking officials? Yes, he had a meeting one morning. I went to the beach. Did he discuss the purpose of this meeting with you? He mentioned something about asset protection and privacy laws. Catherine nodded as if this confirmed something important. Ms. Reynolds, are you aware that Mr. Parker recently purchased an engagement ring from Shreve, Crump & Lowe? The question landed like a grenade in the conference room. Natalie's eyes widened in genuine surprise, while James's face flushed with anger. Martin Hewitt placed a restraining hand on his client's arm. No, Natalie said quietly. I wasn't aware of that. Catherine produced a photograph of the ring we'd discovered in James's office safe. For the record, this 2-carat emerald-cut diamond ring was purchased on October 15th, 1 week before the Parkers' anniversary dinner. Natalie stared at the image, her composure finally cracking. I've never seen this ring. Were you expecting a proposal from Mr. Parker? We had discussed a future together, she answered carefully. No specific timeline was established. And yet Mr. Parker had created a detailed timeline, Catherine noted, producing another document. This schedule, found on Mr. Parker's computer, outlines his plans through June of next year, including a wedding to you in Turks and Caicos. Were you aware of these specific plans? Natalie's face had gone pale. No. For the first time since the deposition began, I allowed myself to truly study Natalie Reynolds. Not as the other woman, the destroyer of my marriage, but as another woman potentially manipulated by James's calculated charm and strategic planning. The shock in her eyes appeared genuine. Whatever future James had promised her, he'd been orchestrating it according to his own private schedule. The deposition continued for another 2 hours, with Catherine methodically documenting every aspect of James and Natalie's relationship that intersected with marital finances. By the end, several facts were incontrovertibly established. James had been planning his exit from our marriage for at least a year. He had systematically concealed assets through offshore accounts and shell companies. He had spent significant marital funds on Natalie and their future together. And he had planned to use our anniversary dinner as his final obligation before implementing his exit strategy. When Catherine finally concluded her questioning, the atmosphere in the conference room was fundamentally altered. Martin Hewitt's confident demeanor had given way to grim calculation. James sat rigidly, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Natalie appeared drained, the cumulative weight of revelations clearly taking their toll. As we gathered our materials to leave, Natalie suddenly addressed me directly, the first time she'd acknowledged my presence beyond that initial uncomfortable glance. "Mrs. Parker," she said softly, "I want you to know that James told me your marriage was already over in all but legal formality, that you had separate lives and staying together was just a matter of convenience." I met her gaze steadily. "And yet we vacationed together, attended his firm's events together, and were celebrating our 10th anniversary together the night you called him about the lingerie he bought you." She flinched slightly. "I'm beginning to realize there are many things James didn't tell me accurately. That," I replied with unexpected calm, "is perhaps the one thing we have in common." As Catherine and I exited the conference room, I felt no triumph, no vindication, only the hollow clarity that comes with finally seeing the full dimensions of a betrayal. James hadn't just been unfaithful, he had been meticulously constructing an entirely separate future while maintaining the facade of our marriage. "You did well in there," Catherine noted as we walked toward the elevators. "Your composure was perfect." "I don't feel composed," I admitted. "I feel like I've been living in an elaborate fiction for years." Catherine nodded sympathetically. "That's a common reaction in cases like yours, but today was a significant victory, from a legal perspective. Martin Hewitt will be calling me before the day is out to discuss settlement options." "Is that what I want? A settlement?" "That's entirely up to you," Catherine replied. "But based on what we established today, any settlement will be significantly more favorable than what they initially proposed." As the elevator doors closed, I realized the fundamental question wasn't what percentage of assets I would receive, or what monthly support payments might be negotiated. It was whether any financial compensation could possibly address the theft of years spent building a life with someone who had been simultaneously planning its demolition. The rain beat a steady rhythm against the brownstones' windows as I sat in the living room, nursing a glass of Macallan and waiting. Catherine had called an hour ago with news that Martin Hewitt had requested an informal meeting between James and me. Principals only, no counsel present, ostensibly to discuss settlement parameters outside the adversarial legal environment. "It's a transparent attempt to manipulate you emotionally," Catherine had warned, "but there might be strategic value in hearing what he has to say directly." So here I was, permission slip from my attorney in hand, awaiting my husband's arrival. in what had once been our shared sanctuary. The grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from James's parents, chimed 9 as the front door lock turned. James entered cautiously, rain glistening in his silver hair. His expression a careful mask of neutrality. He'd lost more weight in the week since Natalie's deposition, his tailored suit hanging slightly loose on his frame. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," he said, remaining near the entryway as if uncertain of his welcome in his former home. "Catherine, thought it might be productive," I replied, not bothering to rise from my armchair. "Would you like a drink?" He hesitated before nodding. "Scotch, if you're offering." I gestured toward the bar cart. "Help yourself. I'm not your hostess anymore." He winced slightly at the barb, but moved to pour 2 fingers of Lagavulin. His preferred brand still kept stocked on our bar despite everything. The domesticity of the moment struck me as absurd. Estranged spouses sharing evening drinks in their marital home while lawyers drafted battle plans across town. James sat in the chair opposite mine, the leather creaking familiarly beneath his weight. How many evenings had we spent like this discussing our days over drinks before dinner? The setting was identical, but the context rendered it unrecognizable. "You look well," he offered, the banality of the comment hanging awkwardly between us. "Do I?" I raised an eyebrow. "Divorce seems to agree with me, then." He sighed, setting his glass on the side table. "I didn't come here to trade barbs, Eliza." "Why did you come, James? What could you possibly have to say that requires a private meeting rather than attorney communication?" He leaned forward, elbows on knees in the posture he adopted when making persuasive arguments to juries. "The deposition last week. Things are escalating in ways that benefit no one except the lawyers. I thought we might discuss a more amicable approach." "Amicable," I repeated, savoring the irony. "Like secretly planning to leave your wife after using your anniversary dinner as cover to meet your mistress? That kind of amicable?" "What happened with Natalie was wrong," he conceded, gaze dropping to his hands. "I handled everything badly. But dragging this through protracted legal proceedings won't undo that harm." "No, but it might address the financial harm of your systematic asset concealment," I countered. "The offshore accounts, the hidden properties, the aircraft, all marital assets you conveniently forgot to mention." James's expression tightened. "Those investments were made with my earnings." "During our marriage," I interrupted, "which makes them marital property under Massachusetts law, something a senior tax attorney should understand perfectly well." He took a long sip of scotch, clearly recalibrating his approach. "What do you want, Eliza? Half of everything. Fine. You can have it. The brownstone, half the investment accounts, half the retirement funds. I'll even throw in the Cape Cottage. Just stop the forensic accounting and offshore investigations." The nakedness of his concern about the financial investigations was almost comical. "You sound worried, James. Is there more we haven't discovered?" "Yet?" His jaw tightened momentarily before he forced a smile. "I'm trying to be generous. To acknowledge my mistakes and make proper amends." "Proper amends," I echoed. "Like the settlement offer that tried to buy my silence with the house I already half owned? Or are we talking about actual proper amends? That include all assets, including those you've hidden?" "Nothing is hidden," he insisted. "Structured for tax efficiency, yes, but nothing improper." I set my glass down deliberately. "Then you should have no concerns about the continued investigations. If everything is proper and above board, you have nothing to fear from transparency." We stared at each other across the coffee table, the pretense of cordial negotiation evaporating. Rain lashed against the windows, punctuating the tense silence. "Catherine, Ewan has a reputation for unnecessary aggression," James said finally, "for turning divorces into scorched earth campaigns that destroy both parties. Whereas you have a reputation for honesty and transparency?" I laughed without humor. "You've been living a double life for at least a year, James? Planning an entire future with another woman while maintaining the fiction of our marriage? You purchased an engagement ring 1 week before our anniversary dinner. You've been paying for your girlfriend's luxury apartment while restructuring your partnership compensation to reduce visible income. Your credibility in assessing anyone's character is somewhat compromised. He flinched as each point landed, the facade of reasonable negotiator cracking further. I made mistakes, serious ones. But this financial warfare benefits no one except Catherine Ewan's billing department. It benefits me to know exactly what I'm entitled to, I countered. It benefits me to understand the full scope of your deception, and it certainly benefited Natalie to learn you had an engagement ring hidden in your office safe that she knew nothing about. At the mention of Natalie, something shifted in James's expression, a flicker of genuine emotion breaking through the calculated charm. Natalie and I are no longer together. This was unexpected. Since when? Since the deposition. He rubbed his forehead wearily. She was disturbed by certain revelations. Like discovering she wasn't the only one being manipulated, I suggested. Or learning that you had a unilateral timeline for your entire relationship, including a wedding date she wasn't consulted about. It was more complicated than that. I'm sure it was, I agreed. Juggling multiple deceptions simultaneously requires considerable complexity. James drained his scotch, setting the empty glass down with deliberate control. I didn't come here to rehash my failures. I came to propose a settlement that allows us both to move forward with dignity. Dignity, I repeated. You forfeited any claim to dignity the moment you decided our anniversary dinner was an inconvenient obligation to endure before meeting your mistress. He stood abruptly, pacing toward the fireplace where our wedding portrait still hung. I hadn't bothered to remove it yet, a task on my endless post-marriage to-do list. I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But vindictiveness won't heal that anger, Eliza. This isn't vindictiveness, I corrected calmly. It's consequence. You made calculated decisions to betray our marriage while hiding assets. Now, you're facing the calculated legal response to those decisions. James turned to face me, his expression hardening. You want the truth? Fine. I was unhappy for years. We both were. Our marriage became a well-furnished cage. Comfortable but confining. You were more interested in your charity events and social standing than in any real connection. I found someone who actually saw me, not just the role I played in creating. The perfect upper-middle-class Boston life. The accusations landed like physical blows, momentarily stealing my breath. So your affair was my fault? Your financial deception was justified because I chaired the Boston Symphony fundraiser. That's not what 10 years, James, I continued, rising to face him directly. 10 years of building a life together. If you were unhappy, you could have said something. We could have tried counseling, taken a sabbatical, made changes. Instead, you constructed an elaborate exit strategy while using our anniversary as cover for your infidelity. I didn't know how to tell you, he admitted, deflating slightly. You seemed content with our life exactly as it was. Every time I suggested changes, traveling more, maybe relocating for a few years, you had reasons why we needed to maintain the status quo. A memory surfaced. James mentioning an opportunity to head the firm's London office 2 years ago, my immediate resistance because it would disrupt my position on several nonprofit boards. Had I missed signs of his growing dissatisfaction? Had I contributed to the distance between us without recognizing it? Even if that were true, I said carefully, it doesn't justify what you did. Unhappiness is a reason for honest conversation, not systematic deception. You're right. The simple acknowledgement surprised me. I handled everything wrong. I told myself stories about why direct confrontation wouldn't work, about how you were too invested in our life as it was. And then one compromise of integrity led to another, until I was living a life built on lies. The rain had intensified, drumming against the windows with increasing urgency. In the glow of the living room lamps, James looked suddenly older, the confident attorney replaced by a weary man confronting the ruins of his carefully constructed life. "Why are you really here, James?" I asked, genuine curiosity replacing defensive anger. "It's not about settlement terms. Martin Hewitt can handle those negotiations." He was silent for a long moment, staring at our wedding portrait. I wanted to see if there was anything left to salvage. Not our marriage. I know that's irreparable. But some measure of understanding. Some acknowledgement that what we built together wasn't entirely fiction. "Wasn't it?" I challenged softly. "If you were planning your exit for over a year, if you were maintaining parallel relationships and financial structures, what parts weren't fiction?" "The early years," he said without hesitation. "The renovation of this house, the trips to Tuscany and Provence, the Christmas parties we hosted, those weren't performances, Eliza. Those were real." I studied him, searching for sincerity beneath the practiced persuasiveness that had made him such an effective attorney. "When did it change? When did we become a cage rather than a home?" His gaze met mine directly. "I don't know exactly. Gradually, then suddenly." Like the Hemingway line about bankruptcy. The literary reference, so characteristic of the James I'd fallen in love with, cracked something in my carefully maintained composure. "You should have told me you were unhappy. You owed me that much." "I know." He ran a hand through his damp hair. By the time I recognized how far we'd drifted, it seemed easier to create something new than repair what we had. That was cowardice, not strategy. The admission hung between us. Neither accusation nor excuse, but something more complicated, and honest assessment that acknowledged fault without seeking absolution. "I can't give you what you're looking for," I said finally. "Whatever understanding or closure you came here seeking, I don't have it to give. Not yet. Maybe not ever." He nodded, accepting this without argument. "For what it's worth, I am sorry. Not just for being caught, but for the choices I made. For thinking I could build happiness on a foundation of deception." "Did it work?" I asked, curiosity overcoming restraint. "Were you happy with her?" James considered the question with surprising thoughtfulness. "I thought I was, but it was a happiness premised on escape rather than genuine connection, on the excitement of secrecy rather than the substance of partnership." He shook his head ruefully. "I was chasing a feeling, not building a life." The insight surprised me, more self-awareness than I'd expected from a man who'd justified months of calculated betrayal. "What happened with Natalie after the deposition?" I asked, unable to resist the question that had nagged at me since his revelation of their breakup. "She said she couldn't trust me," he answered with bitter irony. That if I could maintain such elaborate deceptions about our future together, she had no confidence in anything I'd told her. He laughed hollowly. "She called me a pathological strategist, planning everything with such precision that the actual human beings involved became interchangeable pieces on a chessboard. The description was so apt, it momentarily united us in recognition of its accuracy. For a fleeting moment, we were co-observers of James Parker rather than adversaries, a strange intimacy born of shared insight into his fundamental character. "She wasn't wrong," I noted quietly. "No," he agreed. "She wasn't." We sat in silence as the storm intensified outside, thunder rumbling in the distance. The grandfather clock chimed the half-hour, reminding us both that this unexpected détente had physical time constraints. "I should go," James said, standing and straightening his jacket. "Thank you for seeing me." As he moved toward the door, I realized this might be the last private conversation we would have. Future interactions filtered through attorneys and court proceedings, eventual settlement meetings focused on asset division rather than emotional resolution. "James," I called as he reached for the doorknob. He turned, eyebrows raised in question. "Was any of it real?" Us, I mean. Or was I always just a phase in your strategic life plan? The question emerged from some vulnerable place I hadn't intended to reveal, but once spoken, I couldn't retract it. He held my gaze steadily. It was real, Eliza. For many years, it was the most real thing in my life. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. I didn't stop loving you and start loving her. I stopped recognizing who we'd become together and couldn't find a way back to who we were. With that, he stepped into the rainy night, closing the door quietly behind him. I remained in the living room, nursing my scotch and contemplating the strange intimacy of his confession, the most honest conversation we'd had in years, occurring only after our marriage had been irreparably shattered. Catherine's corner office gleamed in morning sunlight as Michael Chen, her financial litigation specialist, arranged documents across the conference table. The forensic investigation into James's finances had expanded considerably since our initial discovery of offshore accounts, growing into what Catherine called a masterclass in high net worth concealment. The Cayman accounts were just the visible portion, Michael explained, indicating a complex flowchart of entities and transactions. We've identified additional structures in Singapore, Liechtenstein, and the British Virgin Islands, all feeding into and out of Parker Holdings LLC. I studied the diagram, recognizing none of the entity names despite having been married to their creator for a decade. How much are we talking about total? Michael glanced at Catherine, who nodded permission. Conservatively, about $12 million. The figure stunned me. Our disclosed marital assets, the brownstone, Cape Cottage, investment accounts, and retirement funds, totaled approximately $4 million. This hidden fortune tripled our net worth. Where did this money come from? I asked, struggling to understand the magnitude of the deception. James makes an excellent living, but not enough to secretly accumulate $12 million. That's where it gets interesting, Michael replied, flipping to another document. We've traced significant fund transfers from several of James's high net worth clients, structured as consulting fees paid to these offshore entities rather than to Hargrove, Miller, and Walsh directly. Catherine's expression hardened. In other words, James was diverting client fees that should have gone to his firm into his personal offshore structure. That's not just unethical, I realized. That's potentially criminal. Correct, Catherine. Confirmed. The Massachusetts Bar Association takes a particularly dim view of attorneys who misappropriate client funds or structure deceptive billing arrangements, not to mention the IRS implications of offshore holdings that weren't properly reported on tax returns, which you jointly filed. My stomach tightened with fresh anxiety. Could I be liable for his tax issues? We filed jointly, but I just signed what he prepared. The innocent spouse rule should protect you, Catherine assured me, especially given the deliberate concealment of these assets and income streams. But it does add another dimension to our settlement leverage. Michael reorganized his documents efficiently. Based on our findings, Mr. Parker has significant exposure beyond just the divorce proceedings, professional sanctions, potential criminal charges for tax evasion, possible disbarment. The implications settled heavily. James wasn't just facing an expensive divorce. He was potentially facing the complete destruction of his professional identity and possible criminal prosecution. No wonder he'd been so desperate to halt the financial investigations. What does this mean for the divorce settlement? I asked, trying to focus on practical next steps rather than the dizzying scale of James's deception. Catherine smiled with the serene confidence of someone holding a royal flush. It means we're in an extraordinarily strong negotiating position. Martin Hewitt has requested an emergency settlement conference tomorrow morning. That quickly? The firm's management committee received our document production request yesterday, she explained. James likely has some very uncomfortable questions to answer about client billing practices. Time is now his enemy, not ours. As if on cue, Catherine's assistant appeared at the door. "Ms. Yuen, Martin Hewitt is on line 1. He says it's urgent regarding the Parker matter." Catherine's smile widened slightly. "Right on schedule. Please excuse me for a moment." While she took the call in her private office, Michael continued, explaining the financial structures they'd uncovered. The technical details washed over me as I grappled with the magnitude of James's duplicity. This wasn't just hiding assets from a divorce. This was a years-long scheme involving potential ethical violations and tax fraud. Catherine returned after several minutes, her expression carefully neutral, but a new energy in her movements. "That was interesting," she said, resuming her seat at the conference table. "Martin has proposed an unusual settlement approach." "Unusual how?" I asked. "James is offering a complete financial surrender. All assets, disclosed and previously undisclosed, split equally. The brownstone and Cape property transferred entirely to you. Comprehensive spousal support indexed to inflation. Full financial transparency going forward." It sounded too good to be true. "What's the catch?" "In exchange," Catherine continued, "he wants your agreement not to share the financial documentation with his firm's management committee or regulatory authorities. He wants me to help him cover up potential crimes." I translated. "Essentially, yes." Catherine leaned back, studying my reaction. "He's offering financial security in exchange for your silence." The proposition stirred complicated emotions. On one hand, James's offshore manipulation deserved consequences beyond just an expensive divorce. On the other, did I want to be the instrument of his complete professional destruction? "What would you advise?" I asked, genuinely uncertain. Catherine chose her words carefully. "Legally, you're under no obligation to report his conduct to regulatory bodies. The settlement he's proposing is extremely favorable. Better than what we might achieve even through aggressive litigation. However, there's a moral dimension here beyond the legal considerations. His conduct potentially harmed clients and partners at his firm. The decision about whether that deserves accountability is deeply personal." Michael added his perspective. "From a purely financial standpoint, this offer substantially exceeds what we projected as a best-case litigation outcome. Even with our knowledge of the offshore accounts, courts can be unpredictable." I considered the proposition, remembering James's words during our recent conversation. I was chasing a feeling, not building a life. His pursuit of wealth and excitement had led to increasingly reckless ethical compromises. Now he was offering me wealth in exchange for helping him escape the consequences. What would happen to him professionally if this information came to light? I asked. "Best case scenario, censure by the Bar Association and termination from his firm," Catherine explained. "Worst case, criminal prosecution for tax evasion and disbarment. Realistically, somewhere in between. Likely the end of his career as he knows it." I stared out the window at the Boston skyline, buildings gleaming in the morning light. "I need time to think about this." "Of course," Catherine agreed. "But not too much time. Martin needs an answer by end of day. The management committee meeting is tomorrow morning." As I left Catherine's office, the weight of the decision pressed upon me. This wasn't just about securing a favorable divorce settlement anymore. It was about deciding what justice looked like in the wake of betrayal. Not just my personal betrayal, but the broader ethical breaches that had funded James's double life. The question followed me home. What did I really want from the end of my marriage? Financial security, certainly. Acknowledgement of the harm done, definitely. But vengeance? Professional destruction? The line between accountability and retribution suddenly seemed less clear than I'd imagined. The Boston Public Gardens stretched before me in early autumn splendor, maple trees aflame with reds and oranges, late-blooming flowers stubbornly defying the calendar. I'd been walking its paths for over an hour, phone silenced in my pocket, weighing the decision that awaited me back in the world of legal ultimatums and ticking clocks. A young couple passed by, hands entwined, leaning into each other with the easy intimacy of early love. Had James and I ever been that naturally connected? Memory offered conflicting evidence, moments of genuine connection interspersed with periods of performative partnership. Finding an empty bench near the lagoon, I sat and finally retrieved my phone. 3 missed calls from Catherine, a text from Caroline asking how I was holding up, and an email from Martin Hewitt with the subject line, "Settlement Proposal Formal Terms." Opening the email, I found a detailed outline of what James was offering. Full ownership of our properties, half of all accounts including the previously undisclosed offshore structures, comprehensive spousal support with inflation adjustment, and a lump sum settlement enhancement of $2 million. In exchange, I would sign confidentiality provisions prohibiting disclosure of his financial documentation to regulatory authorities, his firm's management, or other third parties. This arrangement was financially generous, far beyond what Massachusetts law would likely award in court. It wasn't about money anymore, but about what my silence was worth to him. I dialed Catherine's number, my decision crystallizing as the call connected. "I was getting worried," she answered immediately. "Martin's been calling every hour for your response." "I've reviewed his email," I said, watching a swan glide across the lagoon's surface. "I want to propose a counteroffer." "I'm listening." "I'll accept the financial terms with 2 modifications," I began, the plan taking clearer shape as I articulated it. First, the $2 million settlement enhancement should be donated to the Boston Bar Association's ethics education program, anonymously from both of us. Catherine's surprise was evident even through the phone. "That's unexpected. What's your second condition?" "James needs to voluntarily disclose his offshore structures to the IRS through their voluntary disclosure program. He'll face penalties but likely avoid criminal prosecution. I'll sign the confidentiality provision regarding his firm, but not regarding tax authorities." Silence stretched for several seconds before Catherine responded. "This is an unusual counteroffer. Eliza, you're essentially leaving money on the table while still requiring him to face some consequences." "It's not about maximizing what I get," I explained, the truth of this realization settling comfortably. "It's about finding a resolution I can live with. I don't want blood money, and I don't want to be complicit in tax fraud. But I also don't need to destroy him completely." "It's your decision," Catherine acknowledged, "though it's unorthodox. From a legal negotiation standpoint. Sometimes the best solutions aren't found in legal playbooks," I pointed out. "Can you convey these terms to Martin immediately? I'd like to resolve this today if possible." Catherine promised to call Martin immediately, and we ended the call with her assurance that she'd contact me as soon as she had a response. Feeling lighter than I had in weeks, I continued my circuit of the garden, stopping to watch children sailing miniature boats across the lagoon. My phone rang again less than an hour later. Catherine, her tone revealing nothing. "Martin just left my office. He had to consult with James, of course, but he came in person rather than calling." "And?" I prompted. "James accepts your counterproposal with one additional request, a face-to-face meeting to finalize the agreement, without attorneys present." The request surprised me. "What's his rationale?" "Martin says he wants to thank you personally for not destroying his career completely." I advised against it. "These matters are best handled through counsel, but it's your decision." I considered the request, remembering our last private conversation. Despite everything, there was something unconcluded between us, something that deserved a final period rather than an ellipsis. "I'll meet with him," I decided. "At the Brownstone, 7 o'clock tonight." After ending the call, I texted Caroline. "Made decision on settlement. Meeting James tonight to finalize. We'll call you tomorrow with details." Her response came immediately. "Want me on standby?" Mike can be there in 10 minutes if things get weird. I smiled at her protectiveness. Not necessary. This is the final chapter, not a new conflict. Talk tomorrow. The remainder of the day passed, in a strange limbo, the major decision made but its implementation still pending. I returned home to prepare for James's arrival, not in the sense of changing clothes or applying makeup, but mentally arranging what needed to be said. At precisely 7, the doorbell rang. James stood on the threshold looking simultaneously familiar and foreign. The man I'd shared a decade with, now revealed as someone I'd never fully known. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he said, following me into the living room, "and for your counter-proposal." "You're welcome," I replied simply, taking a seat and gesturing for him to do the same. "I assume Martin explained my conditions?" James nodded, his expression uncharacteristically humble. "The donation to the ethics program and the IRS voluntary disclosure." "Yes," he explained. He hesitated before continuing. "May I ask why? You could have taken the $2 million for yourself, or you could have destroyed my career entirely with what you found." The question deserved honest consideration. "I don't want money that came from ethical breaches," I answered finally. "And I don't want your complete professional destruction on my conscience. The terms I proposed create consequences without annihilation." "It's more generous than I deserve," he acknowledged, quietly. "This isn't about what you deserve," I clarified. "It's about what I can live with, what allows me to move forward without carrying either blood money or vengeful satisfaction." James studied me with new appreciation. "I underestimated you. Throughout our marriage, I underestimated you." "Yes," I agreed simply. "You did." "I've signed the settlement agreement with your modifications," he said, removing an envelope from his jacket. "My voluntary disclosure to the IRS has already been filed. Martin handled it this afternoon, and the donation to the Bar Association will be processed tomorrow." I accepted the envelope without opening it. Catherine would review everything before I signed anything. "Thank you for not fighting this." "Fighting would only have made everything worse," he acknowledged pragmatically. "And your terms, while painful, allow me to salvage something of my professional future." We sat in silence for a moment, the grandfather clock ticking steadily in the hallway, marking time in a house that would soon belong solely to me. "I am sorry, Eliza," James said finally. "Not just for the affair or the financial deceptions, but for failing to see who you really are. For treating our marriage as a convenient framework rather than a genuine partnership." The apology sounded sincere, but I'd lost confidence in my ability to judge his sincerity. "What will you do now?" I asked, instead of acknowledging the apology directly. "Professionally, face whatever sanctions come from the voluntary disclosure." "Personally," he shrugged slightly. "Start over, I suppose. Rent an apartment. Rebuild some semblance of a life." "And Natalie?" He shook his head. "That's truly finished. After the deposition, she made it clear she wanted nothing more to do with me. Can't blame her, really." Another silence settled between us, less tense than before, but weighted with the accumulation of shared history and mutual disappointment. "Why did you request this meeting?" I asked finally. "The settlement could have been finalized through the attorneys." James considered the question carefully. "I wanted to thank you in person for your restraint, and I suppose I wanted to see you one last time, outside the legal battlefield, to remember that beneath all the accusations and revelations, we're still just two people who once chose each other." The sentiment struck an unexpected chord. For all his deception, James had articulated something true. Beneath the legal maneuvers and financial investigations were two flawed humans who had once stood before friends and family, promising a future neither had been able to deliver. "Have something for you," I said, rising and moving to the bookshelf. From behind several volumes, I retrieved a small wooden box, the one that had held the anniversary bracelet I'd returned at Emilio's. Inside now lay James's grandmother's cufflinks, gold with small sapphire insets, which he'd left in his dresser drawer. "I thought you might want these," I explained, offering the box. "They shouldn't be hidden away in my house." He accepted the box, opening it with visible emotion. I was afraid to ask for them. "Thank you." The small gesture of returning a family heirloom seemed to affect him more deeply than our entire financial settlement discussion. Perhaps because it acknowledged his humanity beyond his transgressions. "I should go," he said finally, rising from his chair. "Catherine will contact Martin once you've reviewed and signed the agreement." I nodded, walking him to the door. On the threshold, he paused, turning to face me one last time. "I hope you find someone who sees you clearly, Eliza. Someone who recognizes what I failed to appreciate until it was too late." The sentiment, offered without obvious manipulation or self-interest, caught me off guard. "I hope you find whatever you've been looking for, James, and I hope it proves worth the price you've paid." After he departed, I returned to the living room, settlement agreement in hand, but unopened. The meeting had provided something no legal document could capture, a human conclusion to the human relationship beneath all the legal complexities. Not forgiveness exactly, but a recognition that even profound betrayal doesn't erase the full humanity of either the betrayer or the betrayed. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Any issues with the meeting?" I considered how to encapsulate what had transpired, not just the formalities of settlement execution, but the more nebulous exchange of final truths and modified perceptions. "No issues," I replied simply. "Settlement signed. We'll bring to you tomorrow." One chapter closed. As I prepared for bed in what was now unequivocally my home, I realized that the settlement wasn't really an ending, but a threshold, the formal demarcation between the life I had shared with James and whatever came next. The financial terms mattered less than the freedom they represented. Freedom from deception, from performative partnership, from a marriage that had become more cage than sanctuary. Tomorrow would bring meetings with Catherine, formal signing of documents, the mechanical processes of disentangling two lives. But tonight, in the quiet aftermath of our final meeting, I allowed myself to acknowledge both the grief of what had been lost and the possibilities that now lay open before me. 3 months after finalizing the divorce settlement, I stood in the center of my bedroom, formerly our bedroom, surrounded by paint samples, fabric swatches, and the controlled chaos of renovation plans. The king-sized bed James and I had shared was gone, replaced by scaffolding where workers were repairing ceiling damage from a leak I'd neglected during the divorce proceedings. "The master bathroom demolition starts Monday," Caroline explained, reviewing the contractor's timeline. My best friend had transitioned seamlessly from emotional support to professional advisor, her real estate expertise proving invaluable as I reimagined the brownstone as truly mine. They're estimating 3 weeks for the complete renovation, including the custom shower and Japanese soaking tub. 3 weeks without a master bathroom, I mused, not particularly concerned. After navigating divorce proceedings and financial investigations, temporary inconveniences seemed trivial. "I'll use the guest bathroom." Caroline studied me with the careful assessment she'd maintained since the divorce was finalized. Part concern, part admiration. "You know, most people wait at least a year after divorce before undertaking major renovations. It's typically recommended to avoid significant changes during times of emotional transition. Is that in the divorce handbook they forgot to give?" "Me?" I smiled to soften the sarcasm. "Besides, this isn't impulsive. It's necessary." I gestured around the bedroom where James's presence lingered in 1,000 subtle ways. The dark blue wall color he'd preferred, the heavy wooden furniture chosen to accommodate his taste for traditional masculinity, the reading nook arranged to catch morning light for his habit of reviewing case files at dawn. "I need to exorcise him from these spaces," I explained. "Not out of bitterness, but because I can't build something new while living inside the visual remnants of what failed. Caroline nodded, understanding immediately. Ceremonial redesign is psychological transition. Extremely healthy, actually. She flipped through her designer's portfolio. In that case, let's be bold. The space planning we discussed opens up the bathroom and dressing area completely. What about materials? We spent the next hour selecting finishes that represented deliberate departures from the brownstone's previous aesthetic. Lighter woods, brushed brass fixtures, handmade ceramic tiles in seafoam green. Each choice felt like a declaration of independence from the design compromises that had characterized my marriage. The contractor needs to know about the basement media room, Caroline reminded me as we concluded the bedroom selections. Are you still planning to convert it to a studio? The basement renovation represented my most significant departure from the home's previous configuration. James had insisted on a state-of-the-art media room, massive television, surround sound, custom leather recliners for watching sports events he recorded but rarely found time to view. I was transforming it into a ceramic studio, returning to an artistic practice I'd abandoned shortly after our marriage. Definitely, I confirmed. The electrical upgrades are already scheduled for next week, and the equipment arrives at the end of the month. I showed her the spec sheet for the kiln I'd purchased, a professional-grade model that required dedicated wiring and ventilation. Caroline's eyebrows rose appreciatively. You're not messing around with this hobby revival. It was never just a hobby, I corrected her gently. Before I met James, I was considering applying to graduate programs in fine arts. The ceramics studio I worked at in Cambridge even offered me a teaching position. I didn't know that, Caroline said, surprise evident in her voice. You never mentioned it. Because I made a choice, James's career took precedence, and my artistic ambitions became occasional, creative outlets rather than serious pursuits. I ran my fingers over the kiln specifications, feeling a quiet excitement that had nothing to do with renovation logistics. It wasn't James's fault entirely. I allowed my priorities to shift, convinced myself that supporting his career and managing our social life was fulfillment enough. Caroline studied me with newfound understanding. So, this renovation isn't just about changing the aesthetic. It's about reclaiming the path not taken. Exactly. I gestured around the space that was becoming increasingly mine with each design decision. I'm not just removing James from these rooms, I'm reintroducing myself to them. After Caroline departed with our finalized selections, I wandered through the brownstone, mentally cataloging the transformations already underway. The formal dining room where we'd hosted carefully choreographed dinner parties now housed my growing collection of art books and ceramics periodicals. The guest room James had used as secondary office space was being converted to a writing nook where I'd begun journaling again, a practice abandoned during my marriage. My phone chimed with an email notification from Catherine Ewan. The subject, line, Parker final distribution complete, signaled the conclusion of our financial disentanglement. Opening it revealed confirmation that the last offshore accounts had been properly divided, with my portion transferred to the new financial structures Catherine had helped establish. With this transfer, the practical aspects of my divorce were complete. The emotional dimensions would require more time, but the renovation provided tangible evidence of progress. My home was becoming truly mine, not through small decorative changes, but through fundamental restructuring of how I inhabited and used the space. The doorbell interrupted my reflections. The renovation consultant had promised to deliver revised electrical plans today, though she was earlier than expected. I opened the door to find not the consultant, but a flower delivery. An elegant arrangement of white peonies and blue delphinium in a simple glass vase. Delivery for Eliza Parker, the courier announced, consulting his electronic tablet. That's me, I confirmed, accepting the arrangement with puzzled interest. The flowers were beautiful but unexpected. My birthday was months away, and I hadn't. been dating since the divorce. Inside, I searched for a card among the stems, finding a small envelope tucked discreetly against the foliage. The message inside was brief, but immediately recognizable in its formality. Congratulations on the studio renovation. May it bring the creative fulfillment you always deserved. J. James's note provoked complicated emotions, appreciation for the gesture mingled with wariness about its implications. How did he know about the studio? We hadn't communicated directly since finalizing the settlement. My phone rang before I could pursue the question further. Caroline, calling back unusually soon after our meeting. I just ran into James at Restoration Hardware, she announced. Without preamble. Most awkward elevator ride of my life. You saw James? I set the flowers on the entry table, moving away from them as if they might be listening. What was he doing there? Same as half of Boston's recently divorced population, furnishing a new place. He's apparently bought a condo in the Seaport District. She paused before adding reluctantly, He asked about you. What did he want to know? I kept my tone neutral despite the immediate tightening in my chest. How you were doing mostly. If you were adjusting well. Then he noticed my renovation plans for your place and seemed particularly interested in the studio conversion. That explained the flowers and the specific reference to the studio. Did you tell him about it? Not intentionally. Caroline sounded apologetic. But he saw the blueprints in my portfolio before I could close it. He seemed genuinely pleased that you were returning to ceramics. Said something about you being extraordinarily talented and that you'd set it aside for too long. The comment surprised me. James had rarely expressed interest in my ceramics work during our marriage, viewing it as an occasional diversion rather than a serious artistic practice. The few pieces I'd created had been relegated to high shelves or storage boxes, never prominently displayed. He sent flowers, I admitted. Just delivered, congratulating me on the studio. Caroline's sharp intake of breath was audible. That's unexpected. Should I be concerned? Is he trying to worm his way back in somehow? I don't think so, I replied thoughtfully. It feels more like acknowledgement than manipulation, maybe even a kind of amends. Just be careful, Caroline advised. Men like James don't change their fundamental nature overnight. Remember everything Catherine uncovered. I assured her I wasn't dropping my guard before ending the call, but found myself returning to the flower arrangement with renewed curiosity. The peonies and delphinium weren't random selections. They were exactly the flowers I'd carried in my wedding bouquet, though in different proportions. The symbolism seemed deliberately reflective rather than romantically suggestive. Later that evening, after the contractors had departed and the house settled into temporary quiet between renovation phases, I composed a brief text to James, our first direct communication since the settlement meeting. Thank you for the flowers. The studio represents a new chapter. I appreciate your acknowledgement of its significance. His response came quickly, suggesting he'd been waiting for contact. You're welcome. I've been thinking about our conversation about paths not taken. The studio should have been part of your life long ago. I regret my role in its delay. The message contained no attempt at reconciliation, no subtle manipulation, just a simple acknowledgement of his contribution to my creative suppression. I debated whether to respond further, eventually deciding on one final exchange. We both made choices. I'm making different ones now. As you should. Good night, Eliza. I set the phone aside, strangely settled by the brief interaction. There was something restorative about this simple acknowledgement of past imbalances without attempts to repair or restore what had been broken beyond recovery. The following morning brought the first major demolition phase, workers removing the master bathroom fixtures and breaking through the wall that had separated the bathroom from a small, unused dressing area. The cacophony of sledgehammers and power tools created a soundtrack for transformation, destruction preceding creation. worked remotely from the guest bedroom, occasionally emerging to check progress or answer contractor questions. By afternoon, the space was unrecognizable. Walls open to studs, floors stripped to subfloor, plumbing exposed like the veins of a complex organism. We found some water damage behind the shower wall, the foreman explained, showing me darkened wood and deteriorated drywall. Not serious structural issues, but we'll need to replace more framing than anticipated. Do whatever's necessary, I authorized, viewing the unexpected complication as metaphor rather than inconvenience. Hidden damage requiring additional repair. How perfectly that aligned with my divorce experience. After the workers departed, I stood in the demolished bathroom, dust motes dancing in late afternoon light streaming through windows now stripped of privacy film. The space felt larger without its walls and fixtures, more possibility than actual room. My phone chimed with a text from the pottery supply company. Your wheel has shipped early. Delivery scheduled for Monday rather than end of month. Please confirm someone will be available to accept. The accelerated timeline meant I needed to expedite the basement preparation. I descended to the former media room, now emptied of James's expensive entertainment system and leather recliners. The concrete floor had been cleaned and sealed in preparation for studio use, the walls primed for a fresh coat of paint. Standing in the center of this transitional space, no longer a media room but not yet a studio, I experienced a moment of profound clarity. My life had entered precisely this state, stripped of its previous definition, but not fully reconstituted into its new form. The discomfort I occasionally felt wasn't failure or regression, it was the necessary dissonance of genuine transformation. Returned upstairs to find another email from Catherine, this one personal rather than professional. Eliza, I hope this finds you well. Now that our professional engagement has concluded, I wanted to reach out on a personal note. The Boston Museum of Art is hosting a ceramics exhibition featuring several Japanese masters next month. Given your renewed interest in the medium, I thought you might enjoy attending the opening night reception as my guest. No obligation, of course, but I've found that divorce often narrows social circles in unexpected ways. Sometimes new connections help balance those shifts. Catherine. The invitation surprised me. Catherine had maintained strict professional boundaries throughout our legal relationship. Yet her observation about post-divorce social contraction was astute. Many of our couple friends had drifted away, uncertain. How to navigate the new dynamic, or having chosen sides in the unspoken social redistribution that follows marital dissolution. I typed a quick acceptance, appreciating both the specific invitation and its implicit recognition that life after divorce requires active reconstruction of community as much as personal identity. That evening, surrounded by renovation plans and pottery supply catalogs, I realized I was experiencing something unexpected amid the dust and disruption. Anticipation. Not merely for the completed renovation or the arrival of studio equipment, but for the emerging shape of a life designed around my own priorities rather than negotiated compromises. The doorbell rang once more as I was reviewing paint samples for the studio walls. This time it was indeed the renovation consultant, arriving with revised electrical plans and material samples. I drove by your husband's new place in the seaport on my way here, she mentioned casually as we reviewed backsplash options for the studio sink. The building has exceptional harbor views. Ex-husband, I corrected automatically. And how did you know it was his place? She looked momentarily confused. Oh, I assumed you knew. He's working with Meridian Design Group on his renovation. They're colleagues of mine. Apparently, he's converting one of the bedrooms into a home office with built-in legal libraries. Boston designers are gossips. We all know who's working on what. The information shouldn't have mattered, yet it carried a strange symmetry that caught my attention. While I transformed our former shared space to accommodate my renewed artistic practice, James was simultaneously creating a workspace in his new residence. Both of us reshaping our environments to reflect individual priorities rather than marital compromise. After the consultant departed, I found myself contemplating this parallel reconstruction. There was something oddly comforting in knowing that James, too, was engaged in the physical work of rebuilding, as if our simultaneous renovations acknowledge that both parties to a failed marriage require restoration, not just the one who was betrayed. I moved to the bay window overlooking Commonwealth Avenue, watching evening pedestrians navigate the familiar rhythm of city life. 10 years in this house had made these views as familiar as my own reflection, yet now I noticed details previously overlooked. The particular way light caught brass doorknobs across the street, the emerging spring bulbs in the neighbor's window, boxes, the changing patterns of foot traffic as evening progressed. My phone chimed with an email notification from the pottery supply company confirming Monday's delivery. The prospect of creating again after so many years of creative dormancy sent a current of excitement through me. Not the nervous anticipation of uncertain beginnings, but the grounded enthusiasm of returning to an essential aspect of self, too, long neglected. I turned back to survey the construction dust and renovation chaos surrounding me. The upheaval was temporary, the transformation fundamental. In that moment, standing amid the deliberate deconstruction of my former life, I recognized that divorce had offered an unexpected gift amid its undeniable pain, the opportunity to rebuild not just rooms but identity, not just living arrangements but life direction. Tomorrow would bring more contractors, more decisions, more dust and disruption. But it would also bring me one day closer to spaces designed to nurture rather than compromise who I was becoming. The renovation wasn't just about exercising James's presence. It was about making tangible room for my own expansion. The Boston Museum of Art gleamed with understated elegance as I approached its limestone facade, my reflection wavering in glass doors that seemed both welcoming and faintly intimidating. 6 months post-divorce, I still experienced occasional moments of social vertigo, the disorienting sensation of navigating familiar spaces with an unfamiliar identity. "Eliza, you made it." Catherine Ewan materialized beside me in the crowded foyer, her professional armor exchanged for a sleek evening ensemble that revealed a more artistic sensibility than her legal uniform suggested. "The exhibition is everything I promised. The Hamada pieces alone are worth braving the Thursday evening crowd." "Thank you for inviting me," I replied genuinely, surrendering my coat to an attendant. "I haven't been to an opening here since before the divorce." Catherine guided me toward the exhibition entrance, navigating the social current with practiced ease. The first cultural reemergence is always the most challenging, like removing a bandage, best done quickly and without overthinking. Inside the gallery, lighting had been adjusted to create intimate pools of illumination around each ceramic piece. The exhibition, Vessels of Transformation, Contemporary Japanese Ceramics, showcased works that balanced technical mastery with arresting artistic vision. I moved slowly from display to display, absorbing the subtle variations in glaze, form, and firing technique. "You're seeing details most visitors miss," observed a man's voice from nearby. I turned to find an older gentleman with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses studying me with professional interest. "You're a ceramicist yourself." It wasn't a question, but I nodded confirmation. "Recently returned to the practice after a long hiatus. Daniel Weiss," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "Curator of three-dimensional arts here at the museum." "Eliza Parker," I replied, accepting the handshake. "Former lawyer's wife, current renovation enthusiast, aspiring pottery revivalist." Catherine appeared at my elbow with 2 champagne flutes, handing one to me before acknowledging Daniel with warm familiarity. "I see you've met our esteemed curator. Daniel's responsible for bringing this exhibition to Boston. Are you enjoying?" "Your return to ceramics, Eliza?" Daniel asked, genuine interest evident in his expression. "What draws you to the medium?" The question was simple yet profound. one I'd been asking myself throughout the renovation of my studio. Clay remembers, I answered after a thoughtful pause. Every touch, every decision, every hesitation becomes part of the final piece. There's an honesty in that I find compelling. Daniel's eyes lit with recognition. Hamada said something similar, that clay records the maker's fingerprints both literally and metaphorically. He gestured toward a nearby display. This particular piece demonstrates that principle beautifully. We moved toward the indicated pedestal, where a large stoneware vessel revealed subtle impressions along its shoulder, deliberate finger marks, preserved in the fired clay. The glaze had broken around these impressions, creating valleys of deeper color that emphasized the human touch in its creation. The vessel carries the memory of its making, Daniel explained, his passion for the subject evident. Every interaction between artist and material remains visible in the finished work. Unlike most relationships, I observed quietly, where the evidence of interaction fades or becomes obscured over time. Daniel studied me with increased interest. An insightful comparison. Both ceramics and relationships involve transformation through pressure and heat, though clay tends to emerge more predictably from the process. Catherine, who had been observing our exchange with subtle satisfaction, excused herself to greet another guest, leaving me in conversation with the curator. As we continued through the exhibition, Daniel offered technical and historical context for key pieces, while I found myself sharing increasingly specific observations about glazing techniques and firing methods. Your knowledge exceeds that of a casual hobbyist, he noted as we paused before a particularly striking teapot. Where did you study? Massachusetts College of Art years ago, I admitted. I was considering graduate programs when life took a different direction. Marriage? Among other things. I sipped my champagne, surprised by how easily I could discuss my redirected ambitions with this stranger. I convinced myself that supporting my husband's career was creative fulfillment enough. Daniel nodded without judgment. Many artists experience fallow periods, some voluntary, others imposed by circumstance. The question is always what emerges when the creative drought ends. I'm still discovering that, I acknowledged. My studio is barely operational, and I'm relearning techniques I once performed without thought. The museum sponsors a residency program for mid-career artists, Daniel mentioned casually, particularly those returning to practice after significant hiatus. The spring cohort application deadline is next month. You might consider it. Before I could respond to this unexpected suggestion, a ripple of awareness passed through the gallery. Conversations paused momentarily as attention shifted toward the entrance, where a new group of patrons had arrived. Following the collective gaze, I froze in mid-sip. James had entered the exhibition, accompanied by several colleagues I recognized from his firm. Acquaintances of yours? Daniel asked, noting my sudden tension. My ex-husband, I explained quietly. The lawyer whose career I prioritized over pottery. Understanding dawned in Daniel's expression. Awkward timing. Would you prefer to continue our conversation in the adjacent gallery? The Leach collection is less crowded. I considered retreat, then dismissed the impulse with surprising firmness. Actually, no. I'm exactly where I want to be. The certainty in my voice surprised even me. 6 months earlier, an unexpected encounter with James would have sent me seeking alternate exits. Now, I felt entitled to my space in this gallery, to my conversation with this knowledgeable curator, to my re-engagement with the artistic world I'd once inhabited. James hadn't noticed me yet, engaged in conversation with a senior partner whose wife served on the museum's board. I returned my attention to Daniel and the exhibition, refusing to let James's presence disrupt my evening. Tell me more about this residency program, I requested. What does it involve exactly? Daniel outlined the program's structure: studio, space, materials stipend, mentorship from established artists, culminating in a small group exhibition. As he spoke, I found myself genuinely intrigued, rather than merely seeking distraction from James's proximity. Applications require portfolio submission, Daniel continued. Recent work primarily, though historical pieces can supplement if they demonstrate technical foundation. My recent work consists mainly of wobbly cylinders and uneven bowls, I admitted with a self-deprecating smile. Relearning fundamentals has been humbling. Process documentation can be as valuable as finished pieces, Daniel encouraged. The committee appreciates trajectory as much as current achievement. Our conversation continued as we circled the exhibition, my awareness of James's location maintained through peripheral vision without allowing it to command my focus. Catherine rejoined us occasionally, introducing other guests with shared interests in ceramics or collecting. The evening progressed with unexpected pleasure until the inevitable finally occurred. James and I occupying the same viewing area, separation no longer feasible without obvious avoidance. Our eyes met across a display of ceremonial tea bowls, mutual recognition followed by a moment of uncertainty. James nodded politely, then surprised me by approaching rather than maintaining distance. "Eliza," he greeted me, his tone carefully neutral. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Ceramic exhibition?" I replied with deliberate lightness. Given my renewed studio work, it seemed relevant. Something flickered in his expression, recognition, perhaps even respect. "Of course. How is the studio coming along?" "Fully operational now," I answered, momentarily disconcerted by discussing my renovation with the man whose absence had precipitated it. "The wheel you remember from our Cambridge apartment has been rehabilitated, and the kiln is proving temperamental, but educational." "I'm glad," he said with apparent sincerity. "Truly." An awkward pause followed before Daniel gracefully interjected, introducing himself to James and commenting on a nearby exhibition piece. James responded with polite interest, though his social charm seemed slightly diminished in this setting, legal brilliance less applicable to artistic discourse. "We're discussing the museum's residency program," Daniel explained, including James in the conversation with professional smoothness. "I've been encouraging Eliza to apply." James's eyebrows rose slightly. "A residency program? That sounds significant." "It would be," I acknowledged, meeting his gaze directly. "Time-intensive and professionally challenging." "You should do it," James said after a moment's consideration, surprising me with his immediate support. "You always had extraordinary talent. I should have encouraged it more during our marriage." The admission, offered without apparent calculation in this public setting, caught me off guard. "Thank you," I managed, uncertain how else to respond to this unexpected affirmation. James nodded slightly, seeming to understand the awkwardness of prolonged interaction. "I should rejoin my colleagues. It was good seeing you, Eliza, and nice meeting you, Daniel." As he moved away, Catherine reappeared at my side, having observed the exchange from a discreet distance. "Well handled," she murmured. "Both of you." It was actually fine, I realized, somewhat bemused. Neither dramatic nor devastating, just a brief interaction between people who once knew each other well. "That's significant progress," Catherine noted. "Many divorced couples never achieve that level of cordial detachment." Daniel, who had stepped away briefly, returned with a museum catalog and business card. "My contact information," he explained, offering both items, "and exhibition details. For reference. The residency application portal opens next week. I hope you'll consider it seriously." Later, as Catherine and I prepared to leave, I spotted James exiting with his colleagues. Our eyes met briefly across the crowded foyer. No lingering resentment, no pointed avoidance, just the quiet acknowledgement of two people navigating separate paths that occasionally, inevitably intersected. Outside, Boston's spring evening enveloped us with unexpected warmth, budding trees silhouetted against city lights. Catherine offered to share her car service, but I declined, preferring to walk part of the way home. "Thank you for tonight," I told her sincerely. "Not just for the exhibition, but for the gentle push back into public life," she supplied, with a knowing smile. "Part of my unofficial post-divorce service package." After we parted, I walked through the public garden, museum catalog tucked under my arm, Daniel's business card in my pocket. The chance meeting with James had left me feeling neither wounded nor nostalgic, but oddly affirmed, as if his acknowledgement of my artistic talent represented the final permission I hadn't realized I was still seeking. By the time I reached my brownstone, I'd already mentally begun cataloging recent work for portfolio photographs. The residency application deadline provided structure and purpose, external validation that my creative reemergence deserved serious attention rather than casual exploration. Inside my renovated home, I moved directly to the basement studio, turning on lights that illuminated gleaming equipment and organized shelving. On the wedging table sat my most recent attempt, an asymmetrical vase with deliberate finger impressions preserved in its surface, and the experimental glaze that had yielded unexpected results in firing. Daniel's words echoed as I examined the piece. "Clay remembers every touch, every decision, every hesitation." Unlike my marriage, which had preserved an idealized facade while concealing foundational fractures, this imperfect vessel honestly revealed its creation story. The tentative touches of rusty skill, the decisions both intentional and instinctive, the hesitations evident in transitional areas between techniques. I placed the vase on my photography setup, adjusting lighting to capture its details for portfolio documentation. The residency application would require vulnerability, exposing not just my current technical limitations, but my aspiration to move beyond them. Unlike the controlled perfection I'd maintained during my marriage, this new path demanded authentic representation of both accomplishment and struggle. As I photographed the piece from multiple angles, I realized I was no longer defining myself in relation to James or our failed marriage. For the first time since our anniversary dinner's dramatic implosion, I was making choices based solely on my own ambitions rather than in reaction to his betrayal. The vase, with all its technical imperfections, represented something unprecedented. In my recent experience, progress untethered from the past, creation without reference to loss. A vessel of transformation, carrying not just the memory of its making, but the promise of what might come next. The gallery lights cast a warm glow over the exhibition space, highlighting the 11 ceramic installations arranged throughout the room. 9 months of residency work culminated in this moment, the opening night of Emergent Forms, featuring the spring cohort of the Boston Museum of Art's Mid-Career Artist Program. My installation, titled Excavation Series, occupied the north wall, 7 vessels of increasing complexity documenting my technical and artistic evolution. "Nervous?" asked May, a fellow resident whose intricate porcelain sculptures had become familiar companions during our shared studio time. "Terrified," I admitted, adjusting the placement card beside my artist statement. "I haven't been publicly evaluated since law school mock trials." "Different stakes," May observed with characteristic directness. "Fail a mock trial, you get a bad grade. Create vulnerable art, you risk your soul. Much worse." Her deadpan delivery surprised a laugh from me, releasing some of the tension that had been building since morning. The exhibition represented my first official re-entry into the artistic world I'd abandoned for marriage, not as a hobbyist experimenting in a basement studio, but as a serious practitioner with institutional backing. Daniel Weiss appeared, immaculate, in a charcoal suit that emphasized his curator's authority while allowing the artists to remain the evening's focus. 30 minutes until doors open," he announced to our gathered cohort. "Final adjustments now, then please proceed to the reception area to greet guests." I made one last inspection of my installation, though nothing required correction. The 7 vessels, arranged chronologically from my earliest residency work to the most recent piece completed just 2 weeks ago, told a story of technical recovery and artistic discovery. Each piece incorporated elements excavated from my past work, fragments of abandoned projects literally integrated into new forms. The concept had emerged organically during my first month in the residency program. While unpacking materials in my assigned studio, I'd discovered a box of ceramic shards, remnants of pieces broken during my hasty studio clearance when James and I moved from our Cambridge apartment to the Marlborough Street brownstone years ago. Rather than discard these fragments, I'd incorporated them into my new work, embedding them in clay walls or featuring them as deliberate design elements. The metaphor wasn't subtle, rebuilding from broken pieces, integrating past failures into new creations, but the technical challenges had pushed me beyond metaphorical thinking into genuine innovation. The most recent piece, a sculptural vessel standing nearly 3 feet tall, incorporated dozens of fragments suspended in translucent porcelain walls, illuminated from within by a small programmable LED system. In the reception area, I accepted a glass of sparkling water from a circulating server, declining wine to maintain clarity through the evening's social demands. Caroline arrived first among my invited guests, embracing me with characteristic enthusiasm. "This is magnificent," she declared, gesturing around the gallery space. "You're an actual museum artist now, with an opening and a biography on the wall." "Resident artist," I corrected, though her excitement was contagious. "And the biography is embarrassingly brief compared to the established professionals here." "Brief but compelling," countered Catherine Ewan, appearing beside us in architectural black linen. "From corporate wife to ceramic innovator in under 2 years. People love transformation narratives." More guests arrived, friends who'd supported me through divorce and renovation, colleagues from my volunteer work, even my former therapist who'd helped navigate the initial emotional aftermath of James's betrayal. The gallery filled with conversations and evaluative murmurs as visitors circulated through the installations. I was explaining my material process to an older couple when I noticed Daniel escorting a late arrival toward my exhibition area, Natalie Reynolds, looking uncomfortable but determined in a simple navy dress that emphasized her professional rather than social presence. Our eyes met across the room, mutual recognition followed by visible hesitation on her part. I excused myself from the couple and approached her directly, preferring to address the unexpected encounter head-on. "Natalie," I greeted her with deliberate neutrality. "This is unexpected." "I debated whether to come," she admitted, fingers twisting the small exhibition catalog she carried. "But your work, I wanted to see it in person." The statement confused me. "How did you know about my work?" "I follow the museum's residency program," she explained. "My undergraduate degree was in fine arts before law school. When I saw your name among the spring cohort artists, I was curious." This glimpse into Natalie's background, a creative foundation preceding her legal career, provided context I'd never considered during our adversarial positioning. Like me, she had artistic aspirations before law redirected her path. "What do you think?" I asked, genuinely curious about her assessment. "Professional opinion." She studied the installation carefully before responding. "The technical progression is impressive. Each piece clearly builds on skills developed in the previous work. But it's the conceptual through line that's most compelling. Incorporation as both technique and metaphor. Her analysis demonstrated genuine engagement with the work rather than perfunctory politeness. For the first time, I saw Natalie as a person with depth and discernment rather than merely the other woman in my marriage's dissolution. "Thank you for coming," I said, meaning it despite the lingering awkwardness. "It can't have been easy." "Easier than you might imagine," she replied with surprising candor. "I'm not with James anymore, as you probably know. This feels like appropriate closure somehow." Daniel approached, sensitivity to social dynamics evident in his careful assessment of our interaction. Eliza, the Globe Arts reporter would like a brief interview when you're available. Of course, I nodded, turning back to Natalie. Please enjoy the rest of the exhibition. The porcelain installations in the East Alcove are particularly remarkable. As I moved away with Daniel, he murmured discreetly, "Former adversary?" James's former involvement, I clarified, though perhaps adversary isn't entirely inaccurate. Daniel raised an eyebrow but didn't press for details, instead preparing me for the reporter's questions with practiced efficiency. The interview passed in a blur of inquiries about my creative process, technical challenges, and future artistic direction. "And how has your recent divorce influenced your work?" the reporter asked, her final question piercing directly to the personal underpinning my professional reemergence. I considered deflection, then opted for carefully bounded authenticity. My divorce created space, physically in terms of my home renovation to include a studio, and emotionally in terms of reconsidering priorities that had been subordinated during marriage. The work doesn't directly reference the divorce, but it wouldn't exist without that catalyst. The answers seemed to satisfy her, and we concluded the interview as another wave of visitors entered the gallery. I circulated through the exhibition, engaging briefly with various guests while monitoring the reception of my installation through peripheral awareness. Near the evening's midpoint, a familiar silver-haired figure appeared at the gallery entrance. James paused just inside the doorway, scanning the room until he located me among a group of residency donors. Our eyes met briefly before he moved deliberately toward my installation, rather than approaching me directly. I excused myself from the conversation and followed, maintaining distance while observing his interaction with my work. He studied each piece methodically, reading the accompanying text with the same focused attention he'd once given legal briefs. When he reached the final piece, the illuminated sculptural vessel, his expression revealed genuine appreciation. "It's extraordinary," he said without turning, aware of my presence behind him. "Technically and conceptually. Far beyond what I imagined when you mentioned returning to ceramics." "Thank you," I replied, moving to stand beside him. "I didn't expect you to come." James turned slightly, his expression carefully composed. "I received an invitation, though not from you, I assume." "Catherine," I surmised, making a mental note to discuss her unilateral social engineering. "I hope it's not uncomfortable." "Less than you might imagine," he echoed Natalie's earlier phrasing, which made me wonder if they'd spoken since arriving. "I wanted to see what you've accomplished, to witness this new direction." We stood in silence for a moment, studying the illuminated vessel with its embedded fragments. The piece incorporated shards from a serving platter we'd received as a wedding gift broken during our final move. I'd specifically chosen that particular fragment, a relationship artifact transformed through artistic intention. The exhibition statement mentions excavation as both process and metaphor, James observed. Finding value in fragments from the past. Some things are worth preserving, even after breaking, I acknowledged, though they become something entirely different in the new context. The philosophical undertone wasn't lost on James, whose legal mind had always appreciated nuanced language. "A more constructive approach than my recent efforts," he admitted. "I've been focused on elimination rather than incorporation. New condo, new furnishings, new professional focus, as if erasing the past could somehow simplify moving forward." "Is it working?" I asked, genuinely curious about his post-divorce adaptation. "Not particularly," he acknowledged with unexpected candor. "It turns out you can change every external element without addressing the internal patterns. The renovation was easier than the actual reconstruction. The insight surprised me, more self-awareness than I'd witnessed during our marriage or even our post-separation interactions." "I've found the opposite," I offered. "The physical renovation of the brownstone was challenging, but the internal reconstruction has been clarifying. It shows in your work, James said, gesturing toward the installation. There's a confidence here that transcends technical skill, a certainty of purpose. Before I could respond, Daniel approached with an elderly couple he introduced as significant museum donors with particular interest in supporting emerging ceramic artists. James gracefully excused himself, disappearing into the crowd as I engaged with the potential patrons. The remainder of the evening passed in a whirlwind of conversations, introductions, and unexpected connections. 2 pieces from my installation received purchase inquiries, and a gallery owner from Cambridge requested my contact information for potential representation. The validation felt both externally satisfying and somewhat secondary to the deeper fulfillment of having created work that genuinely expressed my artistic vision. As the event concluded and guests began departing, I found a moment of solitude near my installation, mentally documenting the evening's significant interactions. Natalie had left earlier without further conversation, though she'd placed a business card beside the gallery comment book with "Coffee sometime?" written on the back, an overture I found surprisingly appealing as former adversaries with unexpectedly parallel journeys. "Successful debut," Catherine declared, joining me with 2 champagne flutes now that my professional obligations were concluding. 3 potential sales, gallery interest, and remarkably civilized interactions with both your ex-husband and his former mistress. I'd call that an unqualified triumph. I accepted the champagne, enjoying the first sip of alcohol I'd permitted myself all evening. "Did you invite James intentionally?" "Of course," she admitted without pretense. "Closure requires witnessed success, not just private accomplishment. His presence tonight completes the narrative arc." "You're frighteningly strategic," I observed, though without genuine criticism. Catherine's calculated maneuvers had consistently served my interests, even when I hadn't recognized them immediately. "Strategic is seeing 10 moves ahead," she corrected. "This was merely 3 or 4, elementary legal chess." We clinked glasses, sharing a moment of quiet satisfaction as the gallery emptied around us. Daniel approached with final attendance figures and preliminary sales information, his professional demeanor softened by evident pleasure in the exhibition's success. "The director is particularly impressed with your installation," he informed me. "He's discussing acquisition of your final piece for the permanent collection, not typical for a resident artist." The news momentarily overwhelmed me. Museum acquisition representing institutional validation beyond anything I'd anticipated. "That's extraordinary." "Well-deserved," Daniel corrected. "Your technical progression throughout the residency has been remarkable, but it's the conceptual integrity of the work that distinguishes it. Excavation as both process and metaphor is resonating with viewers." As the gallery lights dimmed, signaling the event's conclusion, I took a final moment. With my installation, the 7 vessels captured not just my artistic development, but my emotional evolution, from tentative reclamation of abandoned skills to confident innovation integrating past and present. Outside, Boston's early autumn evening embraced us with crisp air and scattered clouds that periodically revealed stars despite urban light pollution. Catherine's car service waited at the curb, but I declined her offer of a ride, preferring to walk through the public garden to process the evening's experiences. "Call me tomorrow with updated sales information," Catherine requested before departing, "and to discuss the interesting development with the Cambridge gallery owner. His reputation is significant." The garden paths were sparsely populated at this hour. Occasional couples strolling hand in hand or solitary figures seated on benches beneath decorative lighting. I found an empty bench near the lagoon, now drained for the season, and sat to absorb the evening's significance. "Mind if I join you briefly?" James stood several feet away, hands tucked into his overcoat pockets, expression suggesting he'd accept refusal without argument. I gestured to the empty space beside me, not entirely surprised by his reappearance. The evening had contained too many symbolic elements to conclude without this final interaction. "Congratulations again on the exhibition," he said, maintaining a respectful distance on the bench. "It's genuinely impressive work." "Thank you," I replied simply. "It feels right, like returning to an essential aspect of myself." "I think I stifled that aspect," James acknowledged, staring across the empty lagoon. "Not deliberately at first, but gradually through expectations and assumptions. Professional spouse rather than professional artist." The admission, offered, without defensive qualification, represented significant emotional evolution from the man who'd once justified his affair as response to our marriage's constraint. "We both made choices," I reminded him, echoing my text message from months earlier. "I prioritized your career over my art. That wasn't entirely your doing." "Still, I should have recognized what you were sacrificing," he insisted. "Instead, I took your support for granted while resenting the very stability we'd created together." The insight suggested therapy, or at least serious self-reflection. James acknowledging his role in our marriage's dissolution beyond the obvious infidelity. "Have you been talking to someone?" I asked directly. "You seem more self-aware than during our last interactions." He nodded, a rueful smile briefly appearing. "Twice weekly since the divorce finalization. Turns out establishing offshore accounts to fund a double life while betraying your wife indicates some psychological issues worth addressing." The self-deprecating candor surprised a laugh from me. "That's quite an intake summary. My therapist has a gift for concision," James agreed, his expression turning more serious. "She's helping me recognize patterns I'd prefer to deny. The systematic pursuit of external validation rather than internal contentment. The strategic approach to emotional needs." "The pathological strategist," I recalled, using Natalie's apt description from his earlier confession. "Exactly." He glanced at me briefly before returning his gaze to the darkened garden. "The irony is that despite all my strategic planning, I achieved precisely the outcomes I was unconsciously avoiding. Professional scrutiny, personal isolation, creative stagnation." The assessment was surprisingly accurate. Following our divorce settlement, James had indeed faced professional consequences despite avoiding criminal charges. His voluntary disclosure to the IRS had resulted in substantial penalties, and while he'd maintained his position at the firm, his partnership status had been restructured with increased oversight. The relationship with Natalie had collapsed, and his creative potential, which I'd always sensed beneath his legal precision, remained unrealized. "What will you do now?" I asked, genuinely curious about his path forward. "Professionally, rebuild. Trust at the firm through transparent practice and ethical billing," he replied. "Personally, continue therapy and perhaps explore creative outlets my parents discouraged. My therapist suggests the strategic planning that made me an effective attorney might translate to architectural design or urban planning." The suggestion held merit. James had always demonstrated spatial intelligence and aesthetic sensitivity, despite channeling those talents primarily into status-oriented consumption rather than creation. "You did have remarkable vision for the brownstone renovation," I acknowledged. "Before we could afford architects, your preliminary sketches captured exactly what the space could become." He seemed surprised by the compliment, perhaps having expected continued resentment rather than objective recognition of his talents. "Thank you for saying that. It means something, coming from someone with genuine artistic ability." We sat in surprisingly comfortable silence for several minutes, the garden's autumn fragrance enveloping us as clouds shifted to reveal a crescent moon above the city skyline. The moment felt conclusive rather than transitional. Not reconciliation, but something approaching mutual recognition after months of adversarial positioning and emotional distance. "I should go," James said finally, rising from the bench. "Early. Meeting tomorrow with the firm's ethics committee. Monthly reviews continue for another year." I nodded, remaining seated as he prepared to depart. James, I called as he turned away. I'm glad you came tonight. To the exhibition. He paused, considering his response carefully. I'm glad I came too. Seeing your work, what you've created, since our separation, it clarifies things somehow. What things? I asked, curious about his perspective. That despite everything, my betrayal, the divorce, the financial complications, something valuable emerged from the dissolution. He gestured back toward the museum, visible through gaps in the trees. Your artistic resurrection wouldn't have happened without the marriage ending, which means that even in failure, something genuine was created. The observation held philosophical depth I wouldn't have expected from the strategic legal mind I'd married. That's an insightful perspective. My therapist deserves partial credit, he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. But the insight feels important, that endings can be generative rather than merely conclusive. After James departed, I remained on the bench, contemplating his parting observation. There was truth in his assessment. My artistic resurrection had indeed required the marriage's dissolution. The excavation metaphor central to my ceramic series applied equally to my personal journey, breaking through established patterns to uncover authentic creative impulses long buried beneath compromise and accommodation. As I finally rose to continue my walk home, I felt a sense of genuine completion, rather than lingering resentment or unresolved emotion. The anniversary dinner that had shattered my marriage now seemed less a catastrophic ending than a necessary fracture. Painful, but ultimately generative, creating space for authenticity that constraint had suppressed. The brownstone welcomed me with warm light and the faint scent of clay that now permeated the renovated space. I moved through rooms that had been thoroughly transformed, physically through renovation and emotionally through reclamation. No longer defined by absence or loss, each space now expressed intentional presence and creative purpose. In the studio, I surveyed works in progress arranged on various surfaces, experiments with new techniques, explorations of forms beyond, vessels, preliminary sketches for installations incorporating sound and light. The creative momentum generated through the residency continued, no longer requiring institutional structure to sustain its development. On my workbench lay the museum director's formal acquisition offer for my illuminated vessel, official validation of artistic merit beyond personal satisfaction. Beside it, business cards from gallery owners and collectors represented potential professional paths forward. The exhibition had created not just artistic visibility, but tangible opportunities for continued growth. I prepared for bed with the peaceful exhaustion that follows significant accomplishment, neither dwelling on the evening's interactions nor planning immediate next steps. Tomorrow would bring practical considerations: sales documentation, gallery discussions, studio organization, but tonight allowed simple acknowledgement of distance traveled from that devastating anniversary dinner to this moment of professional affirmation. The journey from betrayed wife to emerging artist hadn't followed a strategic plan or predetermined path. Instead, it had unfolded through response to necessity, intuitive navigation of emotional terrain, and gradual reclamation of creative purpose, long subordinated to marital identity. In the darkness of my bedroom, renovated to reflect my aesthetic preferences rather than negotiated compromise, I realized that James's parting observation contained wisdom worth preserving. Endings can be generative rather than merely conclusive. My artistic resurrection had indeed required the marriage's dissolution, making even betrayal and loss potentially generative when integrated rather than merely survived. Like the fragments embedded in my ceramic vessels, illuminated from within, to reveal beauty in brokenness, the experience of my marriage's dissolution had been transformed, not erased or denied, but incorporated into a new creation with unexpected integrity and resonance. 18 months after the anniversary dinner that ended my marriage, I stood in Emilio's restaurant once again, not as betrayed wife, but as honored guest at a private reception celebrating the opening of my first solo exhibition. The Cambridge Gallery that had contacted me after the museum residency had proven an ideal partner. Their focus on emerging mid-career artists perfectly aligned with my creative direction and professional goals. "This feels like deliberate symmetry," Caroline observed, glancing around the restaurant's private dining room, where gallery patrons and fellow artists mingled over cocktails and hors d'oeuvres. Returning to the scene of marital implosion to celebrate artistic breakthrough. "Pure coincidence," I assured her, though the irony wasn't lost on me. Emilio's hospitality director approached the gallery about hosting the reception. I didn't realize the connection until we arrived for the site visit. "Still," Caroline persisted, "there's something poetically just about it. Your marriage ended here. Your new career celebrates here. The narrative cohesion is undeniable." Before I could respond, Daniel Weiss approached with an elderly woman whose elegant appearance and confident bearing suggested significant social standing. "Eliza, I'd like to introduce Marguerite Cabot. She's acquired your centerpiece installation for her foundation's permanent collection." I recognized the name immediately. The Cabot Foundation was among Boston's most prestigious arts patrons, their collection featuring works by established masters alongside carefully selected emerging artists. Acquisition by their foundation represented institutional validation beyond even the museum's earlier interest. Ms. Parker's work demonstrates remarkable technical evolution, Marguerite commented after introductions were completed, but more importantly, conceptual integrity across diverse expressions. The progression from vessel to sculptural installation maintains a coherent artistic voice while expanding formal vocabulary. Her assessment reflected sophisticated understanding of ceramic arts rather than wealthy patrons' platitudes. As our conversation continued, I discovered she had studied ceramics herself at RISD in the 1960s, before family obligations redirected her creative energies toward patronage rather than production. "You'll join us for the Foundation's Winter Symposium," she stated rather than asked, her tone suggesting both invitation and expectation. "We're exploring transformation narratives in contemporary craft practices. Your excavation series provides a compelling case study." The invitation represented another step in my professional establishment, from student to resident artist to collected creator to symposium presenter. Each transition had occurred with surprising rapidity, my artistic reemergence accelerated by the intensity of personal transformation that informed the work. As Marguerite moved on to engage other artists, Catherine appeared at my elbow, stunning, in architectural black that had become her signature aesthetic. "The Cabot acquisition is significant," she noted, surveying the room with practiced assessment. "Their collection rarely includes artists with less than a decade of established exhibition history, exception that proves the rule," I suggested modestly. "No," Catherine corrected with characteristic directness. "Recognition of exceptional talent despite conventional timelines. Different phenomenon entirely." We were interrupted by the gallery, owner announcing dinner seating, the gathering transitioning from reception to formal celebration. I found myself at the center table surrounded by collection curators, arts journalists, and foundation representatives, the professional community that had embraced my artistic reemergence with unexpected enthusiasm. Throughout dinner, conversation flowed easily between technical discussions of ceramic innovation and broader cultural observations. I found myself engaging confidently in critical discourse that would have intimidated me 18 months earlier, when I'd still defined myself primarily as James's wife rather than an independent creative professional. As dessert was being served, I excused myself briefly, needing a moment of solitude amid the social intensity. In the main restaurant beyond our private dining room, I paused to orient myself, suddenly recognizing the exact table where James and I had sat during our ill-fated anniversary dinner. "Eliza?" The voice was familiar but unexpected in this context. I turned to find our waiter from that night, the young man with an artist's intensity who had witnessed Natalie's incriminating call. His name tag read, Marco, memory supplying the detail I'd overlooked during the emotional chaos of that evening. "You probably don't remember me," he began, but I interrupted gently. "I do, actually. You were working the night my husband received a rather memorable phone call." Relief crossed his features. I wasn't sure if I should acknowledge it. That night was clearly difficult. Life-changing, I corrected, without bitterness, though not in ways I could have anticipated then. Marco gestured toward the private dining room. "And now you're hosting an exhibition reception. I saw the article in the Globe's art section. Your ceramic installation sounded fascinating." The coincidence of encountering this unwitting witness to my marriage's collapse during my artistic celebration struck me as fitting rather than uncomfortable. The universe's tendency toward narrative symmetry that Caroline had observed. "Are you still pursuing art alongside restaurant work?" I asked, remembering his evident creative sensibility. "Photography and mixed media," he confirmed. "Just started an MFA program at Mass Art this semester. Would you like to see the exhibition? I could arrange a private tour. The gallery's open." Late on Thursdays, his expression brightened with genuine interest. "That would be incredible. I've been exploring material fragmentation in my own work. The Globe piece mentioned similar themes in your installations." We exchanged contact information with the easy collegiality of fellow artists before I returned to the reception, our brief interaction reinforcing how completely my identity had transformed. The waiter who had once witnessed my humiliation now engaged with me as established artist to emerging creative, a transition neither of us could have imagined during that catastrophic dinner. Back in the private dining room, the gallery owner was preparing to offer a formal toast. Champagne flutes were distributed as she tapped her glass for attention. "Tonight we celebrate not just an exceptional exhibition, but an extraordinary artistic journey," she began, gesturing toward me with evident admiration. Eliza Parker's Reconstructed Narratives represents ceramic innovation that transcends technical mastery to achieve genuine emotional resonance. Her transformation of fragmentation into cohesive artistic statement speaks to resilience that resonates beyond aesthetic appreciation. As appreciative murmurs circled the room, the main restaurant door opened to admit a late dinner patron. Through the partially open divider between spaces, I glimpsed James entering with a woman I didn't recognize. Not Natalie, but someone approximately my age with an academic bearing suggested by wire-rimmed glasses and casual elegance. Our eyes met briefly across the distance, mutual recognition followed by a moment of assessment. He appeared well but different somehow, less polished in his expensive casualness, more authentic in his slightly rumpled appearance. The woman beside him noticed our eye contact, glancing between us with curious interest rather than jealous concern. James nodded slightly in acknowledgement, before being escorted to a table on the restaurant's opposite side. No dramatic confrontation, no uncomfortable interaction, just the brief recognition of former intimacy transformed into respectful distance. "To Eliza Parker," the gallery owner continued, raising her glass, "whose artistic vision transforms fragments into illumination. May this exhibition mark just the beginning of a remarkable creative journey." Glasses raised around the room, the assembled arts community celebrating not just the exhibition, but the narrative of reinvention it represented. As I acknowledged their toast with genuine gratitude, I realized I felt no disruption from James's unexpected appearance. His presence registered as coincidence rather than provocation, entirely separate from my professional moment. Later, as the reception concluded and guests began departing, Catherine approached with car keys in hand. "Need a ride? I'm heading toward Back Bay." "Actually, I think I'll walk," I decided, suddenly desiring solitude to process the evening's layered significance. "Clear night, not too cold yet." Catherine studied me with knowing assessment. "Saw your ex-husband arrive earlier. Any awkwardness?" None, I replied truthfully. Just brief acknowledgement across the room, no interaction necessary. Significant progress, she noted with approval. Complete emotional disentanglement, the healthiest possible outcome. After final goodbyes to gallery staff and remaining guests, I stepped into the crisp November evening, breathing deeply as city sounds enveloped me. The route home would take me through the public garden, now winterized for approaching cold, but still offering peaceful pathways illuminated by decorative lighting. As I began walking, a figure detached from the restaurant's exterior wall where he'd apparently been waiting. James approached slowly, maintaining respectful distance, his expression conveying uncertainty about his welcome. "Congratulations on the exhibition," he said, stopping several feet away. "I saw the Globe article. It sounded remarkable." "Thank you," I replied, neither encouraging nor discouraging the interaction. "What brings you to Emilio's tonight, besides culinary nostalgia?" A wry smile acknowledged the reference to our last disastrous meal here. "Faculty dinner with Ellen's department, colleagues," he explained, gesturing vaguely toward the restaurant. "She teaches architectural history at MIT. The Emilio's choice was her department chair's idea. I didn't realize your reception would be here." The explanation contained multiple revelations: a relationship with an academic rather than another, young associate, social engagement with her professional community rather than his, simple dinner rather than anniversary performance. "It wasn't deliberate on my part either," I assured him. "Gallery arrangement with the restaurant. Didn't realize the connection until too late to change venues." "Symmetrical," he observed, echoing Caroline's earlier assessment. "Though hopefully, with better outcomes this time." I nodded, appreciating his acknowledgement of past disaster without dwelling in it. "Your companion seemed interesting. Not what I expected." "She is," he confirmed simply. "Different priorities entirely. She values creation over acquisition, intellectual integrity over social performance." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "The kind of partnership that encourages growth rather than reinforcing limitations." The assessment contained implicit acknowledgement of our marriage's fundamental flaws, mutual reinforcement of externally directed values rather than authentic personal development. Without directly criticizing what we'd built together, he'd articulated why it had ultimately collapsed. "I'm glad," I said, meaning it genuinely. "Creative support matters." "Yes," he agreed, glancing back toward the restaurant where his companion presumably waited. "I should return to Ellen's colleagues. I just wanted to congratulate you personally. The exhibition sounds truly significant." "Thank you," I replied, preparing to continue my walk home, but pausing as a question surfaced. "Are you still in therapy?" The vague query might have seemed intrusive, but given our history and his previous disclosure about psychological support, it felt relevant rather than inappropriate. "Once weekly now," he confirmed without defensiveness. Transitioning toward conclusion, though the perspective remains valuable. He hesitated before adding, "The offshore accounts are completely dissolved, by the way. Final IRS penalties paid last month. Clean slate professionally and financially." The information represented closure on the final practical aspect of our divorce. The complicated financial structures that had funded his double life now completely dismantled. All penalties and obligations satisfied. Everything fully resolved. No lingering entanglements remaining. "That's good to hear," I acknowledged. "Clean slates matter." We stood in momentary silence, former partners now virtual strangers with shared history but divergent futures. No animosity remained between us, no unresolved grievances or lingering attachment. Just the quiet recognition of two people who had once known each other intimately and now occupied entirely separate worlds. "I should go," I said finally. "Long day tomorrow with gallery visitors." James nodded, already stepping back toward the restaurant. "Of course. Good luck with the exhibition." Good luck with Ellen's colleagues, I returned with a slight smile. Academic dinners can be surprisingly competitive. His answering laugh, genuine rather than performative, acknowledged shared understanding before he turned to re-enter the restaurant. I continued toward the public garden, our brief interaction already receding like ripples on water, noticeable but rapidly dissipating, leaving the surface undisturbed. The park paths gleamed with subtle frost under decorative lighting, the landscape preparing for winter dormancy while preserving potential for spring renewal. I moved through this transitional space with unhurried appreciation, no destination more compelling than the journey itself. My phone chimed with a text from the gallery owner. 3 additional sales confirmed after you left. Cabot Foundation. Requesting studio visit next week to discuss commissioned series. Unprecedented momentum. I smiled at the professional validation, but found myself equally appreciative of the personal resolution that had preceded it. The brief, uncomplicated interaction with James that confirmed complete emotional disentanglement. The 2 achievements felt connected rather than coincidental. Artistic success emerging from personal liberation, creative authenticity requiring emotional clarity. When I reached my brownstone, lights glowed welcomingly through windows that had been redesigned during renovation to allow maximum natural illumination. Inside, the transformed space embodied both aesthetic intention and functional purpose, beautiful because it served creative needs rather than social performance. In my studio, clay-covered tools awaited tomorrow's work session, new forms emerging on the wheel and drying shelves. The exhibition pieces had required months of intensive creation, but the artistic momentum continued uninterrupted, ideas generating further ideas in sustainable creative expansion. On my desk lay invitation letters from 3 universities seeking visiting artist presentations, alongside a preliminary contract for a commissioned installation at a corporate headquarters designed by a leading female architect. Professional opportunities multiplied beyond what I could reasonably accept, requiring intentional curation rather than desperate grasping. I moved through evening rituals with peaceful contentment, neither dwelling on the exhibition's success nor analyzing the unexpected encounter with James. Both experiences registered as appropriate developments in their respective narratives: professional recognition following dedicated artistic commitment, personal resolution confirming emotional growth. As I prepared for sleep, I realized the anniversary dinner that had shattered my marriage now existed primarily as origin story rather than defining trauma, the catalyst that initiated transformation, rather than the disaster that continued to shape experience. The pain of betrayal had been neither denied nor fetishized, but simply integrated into a larger narrative of personal and artistic development. James's betrayal had revealed painful truth about our marriage, but the revelations hadn't ended there. The subsequent journey had uncovered something far more significant: my authentic creative voice, temporarily subdued, but never truly silenced by years of compromise and accommodation. In bed, I reviewed the exhibition opening scheduled for tomorrow. Public reception following tonight's private celebration, critics and collectors gathering to evaluate work already validated by initial sales and institutional acquisition. The anxiety that might once have accompanied such professional exposure had been replaced by grounded confidence in the work's integrity, regardless of external assessment. James's unexpected appearance tonight had provided unexpected confirmation of complete emotional resolution. No lingering resentment, no complicated attachment, no residual definition of self in relation to former partnership. The woman who had sat across from him at Emilio's 18 months ago, devastated by betrayal and uncertain of future direction, no longer existed except as artistic source material. In her place stood someone both familiar and newly defined, the creative self I'd temporarily subordinated during marriage, now fully expressed through artistic practice and professional identity. Not a rejection of who I'd been as James's wife, but an integration of that experience into a more authentic and expansive definition of self. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, gallery visitors to engage, critical responses to consider, commissioned proposals to develop. But tonight allowed simple acknowledgement of distance traveled from devastating revelation to complete transformation. The anniversary dinner that had begun with betrayal had initiated a journey I couldn't have anticipated. Not just from married to single or from corporate wife to working artist, but from externally defined to internally directed. The painful shattering of one narrative had created space for emergence of another far more authentic to my essential nature. As sleep approached, I felt neither triumph nor lingering grief, but simple gratitude for catalysts both painful and productive. The unexpected call from James's mistress during our anniversary dinner had revealed painful truth, but the subsequent journey had uncovered something far more valuable: the authentic self that deception and compromise had temporarily obscured, but never truly erased.